Story 1. Adulterous Decision. It was the day of their anniversary, a hot and humid 15th of July. 5 years of marriage, thought Ethan as he stood at the foot of the bed watching Lucy slip on her summer dress. His blood boiled. Today he'd tell her. She knew that he knew. She was too cowardly and unsympathetic to admit she had ruined the marriage. "Ready," said Lucy, smiling at Ethan. Ethan nodded condescendingly as they headed out the front door and into the car. He started the engine and headed off. A trail of brake fluid spoiled the driveway as they set off towards Lover's Cliff. Up on Route 13, a clunk of metal echoed off the walls in Sam's Auto Repairs as Dylan slammed down his spanner. "Damn it," seethed Dylan. Tossing his oil rag over his shoulder, he made his way quickly over to the office. Grasping the telephone handset, he began to dial. He couldn't go through with it. He wasn't a killer. He didn't want her or the money. There was no answer on the other end of the line. "Lucy, who's it gonna be? Him or me? Decide," shouted Ethan, slamming his foot down hard on the accelerator, heading towards the cliff edge. "It's you, Ethan! Please, stop!" Ethan hit the tampered brakes. It was too late. Dylan, the toy boy mechanic, had planned a different outcome for Ethan when Lucy brought the car for service. Story 2. A Slip in Time. He woke once again, 7:59 a.m., 1 minute before his alarm clock sounded. His own body clock woke him up once more, switching the alarm before it sounded. He stretched, yawned, lifted his head from his pillow, and threw back the covers from his bed. Making his way to the kitchen, he flicked on the kettle, rubbed his eyes, and pulled a mug from the cupboard. Picking up the remote control to his TV, he flicked it to Channel 13 for his daily fix of morning news and travel. He threw down the remote and carried on with his coffee. He poured into the mug, adding a little cream. He noticed that no sound was coming from the TV. Once more he picked up the remote, shook it, pressing the standby button, which in turn switched it off. The first time he switched it, he did in fact switch it on. There was no problem with the TV. The problem was with the TV broadcast. There was none. Simon, 42, had lived and worked in Tameside for the past 30 years. Starting each day with military precision, he kept his apartment in ship-shape fashion. He was a lonely man who never fitted in with the locals, keeping a quiet and solitary life. He walked from the kitchen and stared over the balcony, expecting to see the usual daily passers-by. Instead, he was met with an empty town center. Taking a sip from his coffee and looking quite bemused, he carried on with his daily dressing rehearsal. 8:13 a.m. Adjusting his tie and slipping on his shoes, Simon headed for his front door, closing it behind him, heading down Stamford Street to his managerial position. There was total silence. Empty streets, not a person to be seen. Simon, preoccupied to notice, fumbled with his briefcase, dropping it to the floor, spilling the documents that were inside. The wind blew the papers along the street. Simon gave chase after them with no success. The paperwork blew far down the street. It was only then when Simon looked around him to see not a single person or vehicle in sight. He turned around, looking in the opposite direction. Desolation was all he could see. Walking quickly towards his office in a panic, he arrived to the same sight. Emptiness and silence. His staff had opened up, but no one was inside. Simon began to become a little breathless and reached into his pocket for his asthma inhaler. His heavy weight and asthma issues made it difficult for him to exercise. "This is crazy. There must be someone in the supermarket," thought Simon to himself. Leaving his office, he headed down the street to the subway, passing the empty roundabout, down and through onto the supermarket car park. He stopped suddenly to see the fear he had been dreading on the way. Complete emptiness. The car park and the inside were the same. Simon pulled off his tie, took a handkerchief and wiped the sweat from his forehead. He was breathing hard, feeling completely numb. He turned and walked at a quickish pace to the town center in the hope to find someone else. How could this be? Where is everybody? Simon questioned himself. Making his way past the old offices of the newspaper company and up to the market, the scene was the same. "Hello?" shouted Simon at the top of his voice. His voice echoed back. Walking through to the arcades, music played from them, but nobody was in sight. Each and every shop was deserted. Simon walked on towards McDonald's, looking towards the clock above the new marketplace. he noticed that the time was still the same as when he had left his apartment. This now feared Simon very much. Time had stopped. He had somehow woken up in a different time zone, only this time zone was one where Simon was living all to himself. Automatic doors opened to the entrance of McDonald's. Simon walked to the counter, shouting for attention. There was no reply, only the recorded music that spilled from the speaker system inside the restaurant. Simon made his way round to the serving area, helping himself to a breakfast bun and a coffee. It reminded him of the story Mary Celeste, only in a restaurant setting. The food was as if it had just been cooked, but no one around to cook it. Putting the exact change onto the counter, Simon sat and began to eat the food, contemplating what to do next. Simon wiped his mouth with a napkin and made his way through the market, back to his flat. He felt alone now, more alone than when things were normal. At least if Simon wanted to interact with people, he could do so when the time was stable. But now there was no one but himself in this miserable existence. Returning to his flat, he checked the TV. Still the same. Empty broadcast. There was no signal for his mobile. His landline number was dead. Simon slumped onto his sofa, rubbed his hand over his forehead with frustration. This experience was overwhelming. Simon kicked off his shoes, threw up his legs on the sofa, and fell asleep. Beep, beep. The alarm clock had hit 8 o'clock a.m., the only time in 30 years had the clock woke up Simon. His pillows were drenched with perspiration. He reached over to the alarm clock, switching it off, and quickly jumping out of bed, heading to the balcony, he looked out and saw that everything was normal. Simon let out a sigh of relief. It had all been a dream. He smiled, got dressed, and made the same daily routine journey to his place of work. Simon arrived a lot chirpier than previous days. He felt today was the day to interact with people. It was now 9:13 a.m. Inside Simon's flat, the alarm clock made a strange sound. The time read 8:13 a.m. and had read 8:13 a.m. for the last hour. Story 3. Quizdumb. Hi, and welcome back to Question That. I'm Big Ernie Rich, and this is the show that can get you on that dream holiday you always dreamed of, plus a cool £1 million thrown in, said Ernie with his signature wink. We're here with John from Manchester, who has made his way to the final round. Forced crowd applause. The 5-question word filler. Answer these 5 questions correctly, and that prize is yours. How are you feeling at this stage, John? A little panicky, said John coyly. Oh, I'm sure you'll do fine, reassured Ernie with a Ken doll smile. So tell the viewers at home, the holiday you selected is your dream holiday, John, yelled Big Ern. Well, it's the wife's choice, really. She's always fancied Las Vegas. She's a bit of a gambling woman. She already owes 13 grand to the dodgy bookmaker, so that's what we're going for, Ern. It's also a great place for me to show her the desert, replied John, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose menacingly. Oh, I get where you're coming from there, John, said Big Ern with a chuckle. John flinched a little as Big Ern massaged his neck quite roughly in all the excitement. Okay, John, here are your final 5 questions for that holiday and that huge stack of cash. Take your place on my hotspot, John. Good luck. Can we have 60 seconds on the timer, please? Said Ern quite seriously, changing one of his many game show host facial expressions. Question 1. A form of identity that enables you to cross borders. Blank port. John hesitated. Pass. Okay, John. Second question. I must take the first answer that comes from your mouth, John. John nodded nervously in acknowledgement to Big Ern's ruling. The computer's voice echoed from the quiz screen. The sound of a loud ticking clock was amplified in John's ears. Beads of sweat began to form on his forehead. Question 2. Name the exotic fruit, a sexy-sounding word, that could be used in the heat of blank, I-O-N. Now let's see, said John, rubbing his fingers over his chin. Keep an eye on the clock, John. 32 seconds. Big Ern gestured camply from the right of the stage, watching John on his hotspot. Pass. John huffed and hung his head low. Okay, stop the timer, shouted Ern. Now you're 60 seconds in, John. Keep focused on the game. You've passed on your first 2 questions, but that doesn't mean you're wrong. Your next 3 questions are going to be considerably more difficult. So take a breather, and when you're ready, "Slide yourself back on my hotspot," said Big Ern as he made his way back to the side of the stage. John squinted as a beam of light glared through his spectacle lens, as the studio lights reflected off Big Ern's silver-sequined suit. John's heart pounded. It all seemed like slow motion. He felt nauseous as the loud ensemble of audience noise filled his ossicles. Stepping back onto the hotspot, John composed himself and readied for the final 3. The computer spewed out its electronic voice. Question 3. A popular song by musical youth. A cooking pot was being distributed. It traveled "pon the left-hand side." The phrase, blank, the duchy. John stared at the question. He might as well have been staring at a wormhole equation. He just didn't know. "Pass," he shouted erratically. Eerie music plus the ticking timer engulfed John's senses. Sweat dripped from every orifice. All he could think of was his wife beating him once again with a rolling pin. She said if you don't bring me back that money and that holiday, she would start using the knives. He felt dizzy and tight-chested as he prepared himself for question 4. It sounded to John like the voice was now mocking him as the computer spoke once more. Question 4. Often referred to a highway or a section of a highway that passes around an obstructed or congested area, and a medical term for an alternative passage created surgically to divert the flow of the blood, is called a blank. The tension in the audience was electric. "Time, John, 10 seconds. Big Ern jabbed his finger towards the timer in a kind of Hitler salute fashion. It didn't bode well for John, as it gave him flashbacks of the war. It was all too much. He managed to shout, "Pass!" on question 4, as he clutched his chest and fell to the floor. Big Ern let out a girlish scream. The audience gasped. The computer, unaware of the errors of the human body, carried on with the final question. Question 5. Following an accident and some health issues, some people become unconscious. When a person is unable to respond to people and activities, it is also a song title by Tiny Tempa. Blank out. "Could somebody turn off that goddamn video screen?" yelled Big Ern as he tried to resuscitate John. The cameras went off air at the beginning of the incident whilst Ern administered CPR. It was no use. It was a cardiac arrest. John's arteries would take no more. Big Ern straightened his hair and prepared himself to go back live on the air. Just a minor glitch for the underpaid, famous game show host. Hi, and we're back. Sadly, viewers, we are going to have to cut this week's show short, due to an incident with one of our players tonight. Nothing to worry about. The ambulance crew are taking good care of him, said Ern with his concerned game show face, as the Undertaker zipped up the body bag backstage. For those of you at home who wondered how John got on with his questions, he managed to get the right answer from 1 through 4, but unfortunately, he didn't manage to answer question 5. Question that quiz rule states that an unanswered question will be classed as a pass, therefore rendering the game as a loss. But tune in next week as 3 more contestants go head-to-head to win their dream holiday plus a ridiculous amount of money. So don't just dream that holiday. Ern paused and waved his hand over the audience as they finished off his catchphrase, "Win it!" "And cut!" shouted the director. Big Ern's cell phone vibrated inside his sparkly blazer pocket. The caller ID displayed, "Bitch." He made his way backstage, answering the call. "I told you he would mess this up." "He's an imbecile. Now he's dead," seethed Big Ern down the phone. The chance to get a split of John's winnings was gone. Big Ern hung up on his sister. The drunken bitch could never get anything right, and her boyfriend was the perfect example. Story 4. Severed. Beethoven's Fifth played softly on the gramophone behind him, as he carefully and meticulously engraved the cortical layer of the tibia. He hummed along to the music, excited to see the final piece he had been working on. The stench of rotting flesh engulfed the basement area. The collector had become accustomed to the foul aroma around him as he sat naked, crafting his masterpiece, his upper torso smeared with the excrement of his latest victim, and a necklace made from dried intestine casing with a penile pendant, complete with scrotum, hung proudly around his neckline, a ritual he performed before the decapitation and dismemberment started. He needed 2 more fresh skulls to complete the piece, making a grand total of 13 immaculately shined cranium. Placing the dentist drill back on the table, he took another bite of his ham sandwich that he liked to smear with his present victim's blood. Placing the sandwich down quickly, he manically picked up a straw that lay beside him and snorted up a thick line of cocaine that was piled on a mirror to his right. His face contorted, his lips receded, giving a wide-grinned view of his nicotine-stained teeth. The collector's eyes bulged as the narcotic flooded his bloodstream. He suddenly burst into a fit of manic laughter as he freakishly danced around the tiled, blood-stained floor to the final ensemble of classical rhythms. Stopping suddenly, he stood firm, noticing the red security light flashing above the metal basement door, illuminating the dark and dingy, low-lighted, soundproofed killing chamber. It indicated a visitor at his front door. Erratically dressing himself, he removed the blonde-haired, human-scalped mask he was wearing and slammed the heavy door behind him and turned the oversized key in the lock shut before making his way up 2 flights of stairs that entered and exited the basement. He made his way down the tiled corridor of his vast-sized mansion toward the large wooden front door. Outside stood a police officer. He peered through the spy hole at the officer, flicking through his notebook. The collector's heart raced. He composed himself and opened the door. "Good morning, sir. Officer John Graham. Sorry to disturb you. Just a few questions. We're currently investigating the disappearance of Emily Thompson. She is 19 years old. I was wondering if you had seen her around," said the officer as he passed a leaflet to him. A picture of a long, blonde-haired Emily was portrayed on the leaflet, along with a missing logo, phone number, and her Gresswick town address, just 2 miles from the collector's mansion. He usually ventured out of town to select his victim. He knew that taking a victim close to his home would arouse suspicion, but his lust for the perfect raw material was overwhelming, and Emily fitted the criteria. "I'm afraid I have not, officer, but if I see her, I will surely contact you," he said in a clear and precise middle-class locution as he adjusted his paisley housecoat around his neck, covering his necklace. "Big house you got here. I bet it costs you on the upkeep," said the officer, tilting his head back, thumbs in the sides of his jeans pockets, staring at the architectural structure above him. "I have a butler. He takes care of most of the work in and around the place," said the collector, slightly uninterested to where the conversation was leading. "Yes, sir. One big house," repeated the officer, now smiling at him. "Is there anything else I can help you with, officer, as I am quite busy?" he said sternly. "Nope, that's all," said the officer. He took his gaze from the collector's eyes and tipped his hat to him as he caught a glance of his silk slippers. A thumb-sized splash of blood soiled the fabric. The officer returned his gaze towards him, only this time without the smile. The collector had seen the change in his demeanor and was slightly unnerved. The officer turned and slowly made his way towards his squad car, parked in the stony driveway. The collector looked down at his slippers to see the stain. The sun shone off the immaculate police vehicle's driver's side window, which was quickly dulled by the spurt of blood ejecting from his mouth as the collector thrust a Bowie knife through the nape of his neck. The officer's oversized frame crumpled to the floor. "Now look what you have done, snooping around my property," he said with frenzy, thrusting the Bowie repeatedly into the officer's gut. The collector, breathing heavily, wiped the back of his hand across his mouth, where a squirt of the officer's blood had landed. His eyes rolled as he tasted the warm plasma. Fuck, he said, standing over the mutilated corpse. Looking around in all directions, his estate was surrounded by trees and was 200 meters from the nearest road. He made his way towards the garage and quickly grabbed a wheelbarrow. Gripping the officer around his waist, he struggled as he lifted him into it. A portion of his entrails spilled onto the floor. He quickly scooped them up, throwing them into the barrow, partially covering the officer's face. Stupid, he thought as he wheeled the body towards his front door and into the corridor. The barrow was filling with blood. The collector negotiated the balance of the barrow as not to spill any. As he opened the first door to the basement, he wheeled the barrow over the top of the stairs. It crashed against the side of the walls, in turn throwing the cadaver out of the barrow. The officer's body tumbled down the stairs and smashed against the metal door to the collector's killing chamber. A sea of blood and internal organs were strewn across the walls and covered the stairs. He closed the first door to the basement, headed down the corridor once more with haste and out of the front door to the squad car. He sat in the driver's seat, rubbing the palm of his hand over his forehead. He began to slap his face. No, he cried. His frustration overwhelmed him. His last 11 victims had been meticulously planned. No trails, perfect, nothing to connect him, he thought. He started up the vehicle and drove it into the garage, in between his collection of classic cars. The collector pulled out the wiring to the police car radio, then pushed the button to close the shutters on the garage. He stood at the top of the basement stairs, nervously scratching his head as he looked at the mess at the bottom. He took a deep breath and headed down, navigating his way past the human remains. He pulled the basement door key from the pocket of his paisley housecoat and unlocked the chamber, then pulled the body in, smearing the already coated floor with more blood. The collector took off his housecoat and dressed appropriately for the dissection. Each time, the same ritual took place. Hacking at the pelvic area with his hatchet, he removed the officer's legs, then lifted the torso onto a gurney. The legs were thrown into the butcher boy meat and bone grinder. He had no use for them, for the piece. But he liked leg meat for pies. His butler was a fine chef. The skull would be fine, he thought. He placed a respiratory mask over the mouth of the blonde scalp mask he was wearing, then finished the cut through the neck bone, removing the torso from the brainstem. Opening the large oil barrel of pure hydrochloric acid that lay at the foot of the gurney, he tossed in the torso, then quickly closed the lid to stop the dissolution vapors from escaping. The final body part, the head, was now scalped. The eyes were removed, then hot pressure hosed to remove the final skin tissue. The brain was put into one of his preservation jars and placed on the shelf alongside the other 11 victims' brains. These jars were to be placed at certain positions around the masterpiece once the sculpture was finished, and all 13 brains were in jars. It had taken just over an hour to finish up. The skull was now polished and waxed and was ready for its placement inside the presentation room. FBI agent Harry Bosworth grabbed his badge from his desk, placed it in his pocket, and adjusted his pistol strap before buttoning up his black suit. "I need a tactical aid unit right now. Let's move. I think I know where he is," shouted the agent as he rushed through the second floor of Pleading Milt's FBI headquarters. "Yes, sir. Right on it," replied another agent sat at his desk. He immediately made the call. Agent Bosworth made his way to the lower basement vehicle storage and was met by Captain Dylan Jones and his 6-strong SWAT enforcement unit. All readied, standing beside the Army-issue armored truck, Bosworth gave the directions to Gruswick Manor, home of the collector, 20 miles away. Agent Harry Bosworth had been on the collector's case since the beginning, 2 years ago. He had always been one step behind him. A simple credit card payment from the Clover Motel on the outskirts of Pleading Milts had given him away. He linked that with the purchase of hydrochloric acid from Jacob's DIY and home store, along with the varied purchases of power tools. It fit a killer's profile perfectly. "Okay, I need you to be as quiet as possible on arrival at the mansion. If we can split up into twos, surround the building, and gain entry at any point of access, I'll take the front door with Agent Bosworth. Any questions?" shouted Captain Jones sternly. "No, sir," said the SWAT team in unison. "Then let's move it out," belched Captain Jones. The SWAT truck moved swiftly out of the station and onto Pleading Milts Highway. Agent Bosworth followed closely behind in a jet-black Escalade. He had showered and begrudgingly burned his paisley housecoat and slippers in the open fireplace in the main living area before slipping into an identical set that hung inside one of his vast wardrobe collections, along with many pairs of silk slippers. He was a filthy rich man that had gone beyond the paradise syndrome into the mindset of a deranged killer with a taste for unholy, devilish sacrifices for no apparent reason other than to find some other kind of rush in his life. Making his way from the master bedroom, carrying the skull, he stepped down the large 2-story spiraling staircase to the door of the presentation room. The collector was excited as he turned the handle, opening the brightly lit room, a kind of church-looking structure, only with his masterpiece centrally positioned. An array of human bones pinned together, twisting around each other, shin bones connected to pelvic joints, skulls connected to skeletal hands. This 20-foot in diameter, gruesome type of artistic sculpture shimmered from the bright spotlights that hung above the freakish skeletal structure. He smiled and hummed a piece of Mozart softly as he used fishing wire to connect the fresh skull to a rib cage. "There we go," he said proudly as he admired his work. The soft crackle of stone under rubber could be heard as the SWAT truck slowly traveled down the path towards the mansion's driveway. The unit of 6 disembarked and made a dash outwards in groups of 2 around the estate. Agent Bosworth and Captain Jones headed for the front door. "Sir, we have a police vehicle inside the garage. Over." One of the SWAT had gained access to the garage. Copy that, said Jones as he pounded on the front door. Bosworth stood to the side of him. The collector was making his way out of the presentation room as he heard the door down the hallway. He quickly shuffled along towards it. Sir, open up. We have a warrant to search your property, shouted Captain Jones. The collector was about 2 meters from the door when he heard this. Immediately turning, he ran towards his weapons room, at the far right, down another lengthy corridor. He typed in the 4-digit numerical code and entered the vast armory room. The door clunked behind him. Outside, the captain and agent had already used a battering ram, breaking most of the front door in two. At the same time, the SWAT agents had gained entry from 4 points around the estate and were now joining the agent and captain. Okay, let's spread out and search this place. Keep your weapons drawn and be vigilant. We may be dealing with a maniac here, so be on your toes, ordered the captain. Bosworth drew his Glock pistol from his gun belt and started moving slowly through the mansion. There was a metal clunk sound as the armory room opened. The collector appeared fully dressed, head-to-toe Kevlar armored attire. Brandishing 2 MP5s, he let loose on the SWAT team. Bullets rang out everywhere, ornaments shattered, spraying broken pieces into the air. 2 of the SWAT team were peppered with bullets. Their splash of blood covered the walls and paintings of demonic artwork. Their body protection could not withstand the collector's firepower. Bosworth and Jones took cover behind a marble fountain that lay central to the hallway. 2 SWAT members let off shots of their own towards the collector from behind. The bullets seemed to just ping off his armored suit. He turned around, dropping to one knee, letting off rounds back towards the SWAT. They writhed in agony, gurgling blood from their mouths as the collector pumped round after round until his chambers emptied. This gave time for Bosworth to make a run for him as the collector pulled more bullets from his utility belt. Agent Bosworth took him down with a rugby tackle, then quickly removed his helmet. He jammed his Glock under his neck. It's over. Don't you fucking move, seethed Bosworth. The garage door opened as a black Aston Martin screeched out down the driveway. Pictures of his masterpiece lay on the passenger seat along with his passport. Dr. Adolf Steinson, alias the Collector, had known about Agent Bosworth sniffing around and had always planned for this occasion. Bosworth looked confused as he heard him. I only serve for him! I only serve for him! For he is the giver of eternal life! The Collector's butler repeatedly spoke these words. He was bleeding from his gut. One of the SWAT's bullets had made it through his Kevlar. Agent Bosworth jammed the Glock deeper into his neck. Inside the armory, the remaining 2 SWAT members and the captain searched around. You will all be free soon, said the Collector's butler as he let out his final words. He released the switch to the remote incendiary device he held in his hand. Agent Bosworth quickly turned towards the clicking sound as the armory door slammed shut. Inside the basement, a mobile phone rang, in turn setting off a timer connected to a substantial amount of C4 and thermite. The timer started from 10. The Collector was most of the way off his estate when he saw the bright orange and red explosion in his rearview mirror. He broke into a fit of hysterical laughter, mixed with bipolar anger, knowing that he was so close to a finished sculpture, giving him well-deserved access to the fire regions. It will begin again, he thought. He put on his scalped mask and stepped on the accelerator of the Aston. Story 5. They're not here. It had been 2 weeks since the last visit. He didn't know why they chose him. What he did know was that nobody believed him. It usually arrived around midnight, waking him from sleep. It was the bright lights that illuminated the room. These were what woke him, and that's all that he remembered. It was the same each time. 2 strange marks on his neck and 2 small holes on his temporal lobes. He always felt violated, but he was used to it now. The marks and the small holes vanished after around 15 minutes from waking, and for some reason never showed up on photos. Even the DVR never recorded a single incident. He was frustrated, scared, and alone dealing with his nightmare. He was already awake as his alarm sounded, 6 a.m. Feeding the animals was his daily routine. The farm was left to him by his grandfather. Only 5 of his cattle remained from 10. They had took them, mutilated them, and then dumped them back. He was sure of that. There was no other explanation. 13 acres of land, and not a person for miles. He filled up the pig trough and topped up the chicken coop before tending to the horses. He heard the sound of Jed's horn as he arrived in his pickup. Jed, the general store assistant from town, delivered Carl's animal feed weekly. Hello? Carl? Shouted Jed as he banged on the front door of the house. Just a minute, shouted Carl from the stable. Jed began to unload the feed. Carl made his way over. "Hey, Jed," said Carl in a friendly manner, walking towards him. "Hey, Carl. How's things?" "Oh, the usual, Jed," replied Carl nonchalantly. "Okay, you got your horse and chicken feed. Should be enough for the week," said Jed as he pulled out his invoice book. "Thanks," replied Carl. Jed passed a pen and the invoice sheet over to Carl. "Say, you sure you're okay, Carl?" Jed had noticed the bags under Carl's eyes, encased in dark circles. He had told Jed when the visits began. The rest of Gresswick Town thought he was a lunatic. Jed was more understanding. "Not sleeping too well, Jed," said Carl. "The visits?" questioned Jed. "Yeah, it's been a couple of weeks since the last one," replied Carl sheepishly. "Maybe it stopped," said Jed enthusiastically. "Maybe, but I'm more concerned about the cattle. I've only 5 now. I'm sure it's them, Jed." "I'm sure there's a logical explanation to it all, Carl. I'll take a look down near the creek. I've known folks' livestock to take a trip down to the lake," said Jed. "Thanks, Jed. I appreciate that." Jed made his way back to the pickup. Carl waved him off as he headed back up the dirt track. It was around 1:30 p.m. when Carl finished up with the livestock. A pot of stew bubbled on the hob as Carl made his way inside the farmhouse. He took off his boots and added another log to the burner before sitting down. He poured himself a whiskey and kicked up his feet, taking a sip of his drink. He then placed it on the wooden handmade table in front of him. It was around 3:30 p.m. when Carl was awoken by a knock at the door. It was Jed. Carl got up and greeted Jed at the door. "Hi, Carl. I took a trip down to the lake." "Any luck?" replied Carl. Jed took a deep breath before telling Carl the bad news. "I found 2 of them, Carl." Carl invited Jed inside. "They're dead," sighed Jed. Carl ran his hand over his head in despair. "They were in a bad way, Carl." Carl sat down and finished the remainder of the whiskey. "Their eyes were gone, removed by the look of it." "Jesus," said Carl in shock. "I'm going to get to the bottom of this, Carl. Don't worry," said Jed sympathetically. "Thanks for all your help, Jed." Carl showed Jed to the door. Jed waved his arm out of the pickup's window as he exited the farm. Back in the farmhouse, Carl scooped himself a bowl of the stew from the hob. Its meaty aroma filled the house. Taking a hunk of bread from the larder, he sat at the dining table. 6 seats. Only 1 now occupied. Only memories were left of when the table was filled with family members. He sat and ate, contemplating whether they would visit tonight. Every time he lost cattle, there was a visit. Carl's nervousness and anxiety caused him to knock the spoon from his bowl. He quickly placed it back in. 9:30 p.m., and he switched off his TV, made his way to the bedroom, and lay awake for a while before drifting off to sleep. 15 miles up the road at Kathy's bar, Jed and his brother Eli drank beers as they contemplated their next move. "So there's no way he will sell?" said Eli. "He's not going to budge. I've been mentioning it for a month now, telling him it might be easier to move, but he's holding strong," replied a frustrated Jed. "God damn it. Then we do it tonight. I've got 2 more doses of propofol. That should do it," seethed Eli, as he signaled over the waitress for 2 more beers. Jed and Eli's father had told them about the land before his death. Their father worked at Gresswick Construction as a surveyor. He had told them that Carl's land sat on a wildcat well. He told them that there must be one hell of a reservoir below that property. Their father had left them with the health insurance check of £250,000. Carl's land was worth 3 times that amount, and an untold fortune lay beneath. Jed and Eli thought with a little persuasion they could force Carl to sell. Their plan was simple. Eli worked at the general hospital as an orderly. He had access to the medical supply room. That's where he took the propofol and the epinephrine from. For the past 2 months, Jed and Eli visited Carl's house randomly, always around midnight. Both of them dressed in the alien costumes that Jed had bought online. Whilst Carl was asleep, Eli administered the propofol injection. The drug coursed through his veins, rendering Carl's central nervous system. Eli then injected a tiny dose of epinephrine into Carl's neck, just enough to bring him round, but not enough to take away the effect of the propofol. He then positioned electroshock pads to Carl's temporal lobes. A light shock from the remote device was used to blur Carl's vision, also using a pulsating flashlight to further confuse, whilst they both stood at the foot of the bed menacingly. The procedure lasted around 30 minutes. Jed always made sure to erase the camera footage that Carl had set up in the room before they left. Their antics caused mass confusion for Carl, filling his mind with the concept of a mock alien visit. Jed turned off the lights to the pickup as they approached the dirt track leading to Carl's. They parked way before the farm so as not to spook the animals. Grab the bag. Eli gestured to Jed. The leather holdall lay in the back of the truck. Alighting from the vehicle, Eli slowly made his way to the front door of Carl's. Jed followed close behind. He used the spare key that lay on top of the door frame. Both Eli and Jed stopped in the hallway as they put on the tight-fitting suits. Moving to the bedroom, Eli quickly administered the propofol into Carl's neck. Get the flashlight ready, whispered Eli to Jed. It was then that they heard distress. Carl's livestock outside. Jed moved open the curtains to see a bright beam of light. He stood in shock as he watched a cow levitating downwards towards the ground. He looked up towards where the light shone from and noticed a circular object hovering motionless and silent in the night sky. There was a brief flash of a second beam of light. Beside the first beam, 2 figures appeared. Jed leaned closer to the window and squinted, trying to focus on the 2 elongated silhouettes. What the hell are you doing? Said Eli, angrily whispering as he placed the medical items on the bedside table. Jed didn't reply, as he watched another cow traveling down the beam of light, then another, totaling 5. 5 replaced the 5 that were previously abducted. The Greys ushered the genetically modified cattle into the fields to join the rest. There's something out here, said Jed, now trembling. What are you talking about? Replied Eli, making his way to join Jed. Eli moved the curtain wider. 2 sets of green eyes looked towards them. As they noticed the movement, Eli quickly drew the curtains shut. Shit! What the fuck is that? Said Eli as he backed away from the window erratically. I've no idea, replied Jed nervously. Let's get out of here, said Eli, quickly packing up the leather holdall. Carl lay comatose and completely oblivious to what was unfolding. There was no time to erase the camera footage as they made their way to the back door of the property. Making haste, they exited the rear of the property. Eli dropped the leather holdall as he noticed the 2 Greys 6 feet in front of him. Jed made a run for it, quite comically dressed head to toe in an alien outfit, but it was no use. One of the Greys deployed some sort of pulse weapon, completely evaporating him. Wait, please, yelled Eli, fumbling, trying to remove his alien mask. The other Grey trained his weapon towards him. I'm human! See? Said Eli, manically thinking that because of his outfit, he was a threat of the alien kind. The Grey lowered his weapon and signaled to the ship. The same beam of light that delivered the cattle now pulled Eli screaming skyward. A second light transporter now collected the Greys, pulling them too back to the ship. There was a blinding flash as the ship departed, leaving Carl's farm back in darkness. It was 6:30 a.m. when Carl woke. It was the sound of his cattle that woke him, 5 more than the day before. He stood, baffled at the front of his property, as he stared at his full herd. The only difference now was that 3 of his pigs had gone. He usually remembered the visits, but for some reason this time was different. Carl made his way back to the bedroom and checked his camera footage. He finally knew what had been going on all along. He would call Sergeant North, embarrassed, and tell him of his findings, only this time, from the many times he had called the sergeant out, who often told him that aliens don't exist. Carl would have to agree that these events were earthbound, and that they're not here, and have never been here. Story 6. Intergalactic Anomaly. Captain Abramovich breathed heavily, steaming the inside of his helmet as the spatial mist crept closer. The final routine maintenance outside of his interstellar craft was underway before its re-entry to planet Earth from their long trip back from Miranda. Malfunctions had started on their way through the Kepler belt. They were rectified. The captain thought no more of it. But that must have been where it had attached itself to the craft, lying in wait for this moment, possibly in a cryogenic state during travel. It was then that he saw it. A type of mist was tearing through the inside of the ship and was now enveloping the exterior of the craft. The captain's ship was now an out-of-control hunk of metal heading towards Earth's stratosphere. He watched as the last 2 of his crew inside the cargo hold were engulfed, disappearing into its thick smog. A strange substance, which should not have existed in deep space, ripped their extravehicular mobility unit suits apart. He had no idea where it had taken them. All he knew was that he was not going to be taken himself. Its swirling gray mass grew in size. The satellite, attached next to the docking arm, had now been consumed. The mist crumpled it like a sweet wrapper. Floating towards the escape pod, which was still intact on the hull of the deep space cruiser, the captain detached his safety tether, which in turn snaked away into the spatial abyss. He began to panic. His chest painfully burned with every inhalation as he sucked in pure oxygen. If he could make it, he could fire the retro rockets inside the pod on a course toward the approaching International Space Station. The mist crunched a large section of solar panels, sucking them into its gray void. The captain looked behind himself once more, checking the distance between him and the gray mass. He moved quicker than the mist. There was about 25 meters from him and the pod as he heard a clunk of metal from the air compression connection to his pistol grip tool, which caught around an external truss as he passed, causing him to jerk forward, then back towards the mist. The captain fumbled, trying to release himself from the entanglement. He tugged on the cable, propelling himself forward once more as he ripped the tool free. The mist was now very close. About 13 meters separated him from it. Floating at speed, now just a meter from the pod's door handle, he reached out. He had only one shot at grabbing the handle. There was a thud as the captain firmly gripped hold of the pod door handle. He quickly released the hatch and threw himself inside, closing it fast. He turned the lock and positioned in the seat, strapping himself in. Punching in the launch codes, he looked outside the capsule window. The gray mass was now inches from his face as he heard what could only be described as whale sounds. A giant cigar-shaped, shiny metallic craft passed by the pod window, blocking his view, bigger than 5 space shuttles combined. The captain looked on in astonishment. It seemed to scoop up the mist at an incredible speed. Behind the craft, another similar UFO chased after it, firing some kind of plasma beam toward it. The captain fired the retro rockets, boosting the capsule into orbit and in the direction of the oncoming station, away from the mysterious craft. The pod spun around 90 degrees as the captain set his course away from it. He watched through the pod window as the two craft were engaged in a space battle. Beams of plasma struck off each other's craft. The objects performed unfathomable maneuvers he had never seen before. Defense shields stopped the pulses from annihilating each other. This brief star battle lasted about 1 minute as the captain stared in awe. As quickly as this event had started, it was over. Skytech Space Defense from planet Earth must have already got wind of this situation and had fired a pulse of electro-missile toward the craft. The shot had definitely interrupted their flight, as each craft seemed to activate a quantum drive, both shooting away in different directions, out of view into the depths of space, at an alarming speed, leaving a trail of light behind them. No sign of the mist remained. The spatial void above Earth became still and lifeless once more, as the captain took a deep breath, steadied himself, and clicked the intercommunications panel button to alert the space station of his unscheduled arrival. Story 7. The Fear of the Flush. No way. I refuse to believe it this time. No man can have this much luck, thought Smooth-Hand Mike. The piano at Old Joe's saloon had stopped playing, a pure sign things were serious. He looked deep into the eyes of Big Tex. His reputation for flushin' was legendary. No one had ever had the funds to see him, but tonight, Mike was not to be bought off with his reg ace. Now let's see. Tex pre-raised the flop. Ace queen. Jack of hearts hits. Thought Mike, running his fingers through his thick gray beard. His stubby nicotine-stained fingers held the beer-stained King of Hearts and Nine of Hearts. Tex smiled menacingly, sporting a long black mustache, sombrero, and encased in a thick cloud of cigar smoke. Smooth-Hand Mike slowly lowered his hand down to his gun belt. This hand's mine, thought Mike, tilting down his Stetson, partially covering his eyes. Onlookers took notice. A stream of townsfolk shuffled their way into the saloon to see the showdown. Tex let out a full-bellied laugh as he pushed in all 13 of his $10 chips, hoping for the fold. Smooth-Hand Mike called the bet. A distraught look engulfed the face of Big Tex. "Show 'em," shouted Mike. Tex threw down Ace of Hearts, 8 of Clubs. Dead man's hand? "Why, you dirty!" A shot rang out as the onlookers ducked for cover. The cigar from the mouth of Big Tex dropped, landing on his cards. Tex spat blood, landing on the Ace of Hearts and partially covering the face of Mike. A shot to the gut from under the table sealed the fate of Big Tex. "Cheatin' was his game, and we'll have none of that in my town," shouted Smooth-Hand Mike. The piano commenced. Old Joe wiped over the top of the bar as the onlookers carried on with their debauchery. Smooth-Hand Mike readjusted his Stetson, reached inside of his jacket pocket, pulling a handkerchief he wiped over his face. He unclipped his sheriff's badge, rubbed off a splash of blood before placing it back onto his lapel. Sheriff Mike casually stood up from the table and made his way past the Undertaker on the way through the saloon doors. Story 8. Streamers. A sweltering hot July, to the west of Groom Lake, Nevada, at the Burring Science and Technology Facility, Dr. Alan Burring turned the dial to 1,000 electrorays, 300 more than the previous test attempts. This time he hoped for the total distance and not drop short, a catastrophe for a manned journey. His calculations were set. There was no room for error now. After 15 years of working on the pod stream, a piece of technology that could manipulate time and space, it was now ready. Its components remained stable from the previous unmanned tests. The doctor had finally stabilized the variants on the space-time continuum. Their destination? 1,300 light-years from the sun, Mintaka. He had made contact twice before, signals he had come to understand. His manic Einstein theories convinced him that this journey was inevitable. Mintaka, the westernmost point of the 3 stars of Orion's belt, is one of the brightest stars in the sky. That's where they were, the others. A highly evolved species, capable of unimaginable feats. They had been here before, Egypt, 2700 BC, adjusting the Earth's magnetosphere. The doctor had made a radical discovery on the Orion correlation theory, which enlightened him to construct the pod stream. If he was right, it was our only hope to ask our forefathers to help us from the imminent disaster our planet was about to succumb. No terrestrial technology could evade this dark event. The doctor's hypothesis led him to believe that this experiment was viable. "Hold on, Caleb. We're going to increase the stream," shouted the doc anxiously, hobbing to and from an array of control panels. "Okay. Try not to fry my hair this time," replied Caleb, comically sarcastic as he stood naked inside the pod. The doctor tilted his glasses and smirked at Caleb's nonchalant comment. Caleb Austin, the doctor's assistant, was chosen from the many applicants that applied for the special relativity program. A bulk of a man, muscular and ripped, he pressed both hands on the interior of the pod's walls, his feet astride, creating a star position. The cerebral memory fiber, containing the doctor's reports, detached from Caleb's cranium. The vibration of the pod caused his teeth to clatter. "I'm going to reduce the backstream pressure, minimizing multiple space-time ripples, so your lift will keep you on a straight path, stopping the chance of side-sliding against the time cylinder," said the doc, manically turning and twisting buttons on the control panel hub. "Whatever you say, Doc," replied Caleb, his voice barely audible as he focused himself inside the pod. The doc hit the time stream switch. With a blinding flash inside the pod and an intense humming sound, Caleb's molecular physical presence evaporated into time and space. The doc was knocked to the floor from the electromagnetic pulse that quickly emanated from the pod's structure. He struggled, reaching for his cane. The doc wobbled upright and swiftly pushed the fail-safe switch. He removed his ear defenders and made his way over to the pod. The doc used his cane to chip away at the ice covering the front panel opening mechanism. The pod's door opened with a sliding motion as the doc placed his hand on the scanner. It was a perfect transition. The pod was empty and clear of debris. Previous tests with the primates had been devastating. Shuffling back to the hub, the doc checked the monitor on Caleb's trajectory. All seemed fine. He would now wait. 1 year for Caleb in the stream. 1 hour for the doctor in the lab. Mankind rested on Caleb's actions. The doc was sure the numbers were right. He prayed to God they were right. Story 9. The Missing Codex. He checked his watch. 9:27 p.m. The date? July 2nd, 2017. His lamp battery was diminishing. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his thigh. He removed his climbing gear and tossed it to the frozen mountaintop. Edward Croft, a professional rock climber, had tested himself to ascend the famous Craggy Rock. Tales of gold artifacts and diamonds hidden at the summit. This Goliath of a climb fired the adrenal of many climbers to be the first. A compulsion to reach the top for every climber, with greed more a factor than climbing for passion. Many had failed, never making it past the halfway point. Edward had trained hard for this day. It had took him 2 days and nights, finally reaching the top. He was the first to make it. He hoped to find the riches he deserved, but only to be greeted with a large hold entrance at the peak, leading down into the heart of the mountain itself. How can this be? How could man have possibly tunneled a hole through the summit into the mountain? It was way too high and way too narrow to bring mining equipment to the top, Edward questioned himself. He sat on a frosted rock at the entrance to the tunnel and adjusted the ligature on his thigh. There's no way of making it back down, not with the injury. I'm going to have to take the tunnel down. There has to be a way out, Edward contemplated. He looked around. Sharp gusts of wind shook the ice crystals from his matted black beard as he took in the magnificent views of the surrounding mountaintops. He removed his backpack and began to pack away his climbing gear whilst taking a blast of his oxygen supply. His last can was registering 13%. If he used it sparingly, he would have 4 hours' supply, not enough to descend the mountain. Even without the injury, it was impossible. He now knew he had no option but to take the tunnel. Edward pulled the strap tight on his rucksack and made his first steps inside the entrance cautiously. The mouth of the tunnel's interior was a smooth circular opening, as if bored out with a tunneling drill, 12 feet in diameter. He was bewildered by the way this was. It did not seem man-made. He clambered unsteadily. Further down through the tunnel, loose rocks tumbled underfoot, echoing off the walls as they bounced down into the dark chasm. There was no going back up to the entrance. The pain in his thigh was accelerating. Edward began to sweat. He tapped on his lamp. It flickered, giving him a little more illumination for a second, then back to its low beam. His view limited to under 2 feet, as the energy from the batteries depleted some more. He stopped and looked around the walls of the tunnel. His lamp illuminated his surroundings. Edward reached to the right-hand side pocket of his rucksack and produced an emergency flare. He ripped off the top, causing the flare to spark and burst into a bright red glare, now lighting up the tunnel walls around him. Edward first noticed strange markings on the walls, plastered all around him. The markings looked very similar to the ones he had studied in college. The Dresden Codex, the oldest surviving book from the Americas, dating to the 13th or 14th century. He could not decipher its meanings, but the artwork was amazing. Edward moved the flare to the left and right of the tunnel walls before moving the glowing red flame toward his feet that were unbalanced under the loose rocks beneath him, or what he thought were loose rocks. He dropped the flare from his hand in shock as he noticed the tunnel floor consisted of hundreds of human skulls, trailing down into the dark chasm of the tunnel. Each skull looked as though they had been polished clean. Edward froze. Breathing heavily, he looked back towards the tunnel entrance. He rubbed his hand over his forehead with frustration. He had no option but to carry on forward. Picking up a piece of wood from the tunnel floor, he used it as a crutch as he made his way forward once more, navigating his way through the pathway of skulls. His lamp now flickered, nearing complete depletion. His bandage on his thigh was now soaked and dripping with blood. Edward fired up another flare and noticed the pathway of skulls now leading into the belly of the cave, which consisted of a sea of human skeletal remains, all of which were also polished clean. There were an array of clothing mixed in between the skeletal remains. He noticed an open-circuit oxygen system and a pair of reindeer skin boots to the left of him. Edward was dumbfounded. He was not the first to climb the rock. The year was now 2018, and the equipment that he had found dated circa 1953. Alongside these artifacts was at least a kilo rough-cut bar of pure gold. He quickly stuffed it into his rucksack, along with scriptures that he had recognized once before on his trip to the Saxon State Library in Germany, scriptures illustrating hieroglyphs. He now realized that the remains inside the cave were where other climbers had succumbed to a grisly end. His lamp now fully depleted of its battery, rendering total darkness. It was at that point Edward heard a vibrating humming sound coming from the entrance to the tunnel. Something was heading his way. He sensed danger and was filled with fear of the unknown. Edward could just make out a place to hide and quickly shuffled over to a crevice in the cave wall and used the skeletal remains around him to cover himself. Edward watched as a bright blue light beamed down into the tunnel, causing him to squint with the brightness. It lit up the cave exponentially. Edward inhaled sharply with surprise as he saw the cave in full light. There were hundreds, not just climbers. There were also child skeletal remains. The vibrating hum grew louder as it moved further down the tunnel slowly. Edward's breathing became irregular. He began to feel faint with the loss of blood. blood loss from his thigh. Edward reached into his rucksack and produced a clean roll of bandage, unwrapped the blood-soaked one from his thigh, and replaced it with the fresh one. The bleeding was subsiding as he tightly wrapped the dressing with the fresh one. The bleeding was subsiding as he tightly wrapped the dressing. The object entering the tunnel seemed to stop just before the mouth of the cave. The vibrating hum echoed eerily off the cave's walls. It was still out of view from Edward's standpoint. There was about 15 seconds of silence. There was about 15 seconds of stillness. Just the object's hum invaded the cave before the object let out a sound. Before the object let out a sound that could only be described as a single L-porn. Before the object let out a sound that could only be described as a single L-porn. Edward threw his hands onto his ears. The sound was immense. Edward threw his hands onto his ears. The sound was immense. After around 10 seconds, the horn stopped. From the back of the cave, bones slowly started to displace themselves. Something was coming from below. Edward pulled a few more bones around him in hope to cover himself completely, avoiding being detected by the object and whatever was coming from below. It was now reaching the top of the sea of bones. The skeletal remains toppled downwards from the mound this was being. The skeletal remains toppled downwards from the mound this being was creating as it made its way to the top to greet the object. Edward's heart pounded, watching as it reached the top. A hideous and grotesque-looking figure, the size of an elephant, crawled its way out of the top of the mound of bones. It seemed to be covered in a slime of some kind. An elongated, scaly gray head with a thin neck writhed around on the torso of a scaly body. Its arms, thin and withered, reached out to the object, which now had started the L-porn once more. Its arms, thin and withered, reached out to the object, which now had started the L-porn sound once more, as if in acknowledgement of the arrival of the being. As if in acknowledgement of the arrival of the being, lasting another 10 seconds before it stopped. The creature let out a high-pitched scream, seemingly communicating with the object. It was then 2 human corpses began to levitate directly towards the creature along the blue light the object was projecting. The creature squealed in a kind of excited way, thrusting its arms back and forth, awaiting the meal the object was delivering. The creature swiftly clawed the 2 cadavers out of mid-air. Pinning them down, in return, the creature produced the largest diamond Edward had ever seen, the size of a football. The size of a football into the beam of light above it. It too levitated toward the object, and out of the sight of Edward. It too levitated toward the object and out of the sight of Edward. The creature began to tear away at the clothes of the dead, ripping its way to bare flesh as it began to devour its prey. Edward moved slightly, trying to adjust his laying position in the crevice, hoping to catch a glimpse of the object in the tunnel. He jumped as the beam of light turned off, and the hum of the... He jumped as the beam of light turned off, and the hum from the object started to dissipate. A sonic boom sound echoed off the cave walls as it turned to pitch black once more. Edward froze in panic. He could hear the creature gnawing away at its meal, slurping and chewing. Its cobalt blue eyes were all Edward could see as he listened. At that point, the stack of bones covering him slipped away, crashing down into the belly of the cave. The creature stopped eating quickly and gazed towards Edward. He lay motionless, shaking with fear. It felt like a lifetime as he locked his stare towards the creature's eyes. It felt like a lifetime as he locked his stare toward the creature's eyes, awaiting its next move. It turned away and carried on eating. Edward lay silent for over 20 minutes before the creature had finished, then burrowing its way back down from below where it had come from. Edward lay silent for over 20 minutes before the creature had finished, then burrowing its way back down below from where it had come from. He quickly scrambled down from the crevice, still in pain from the wound on his thigh. Reaching into his rucksack, he produced another flare and quickly lit it up. Edward shone it toward where the creature was positioned. It was gone. All that remained was steaming fresh polished bones on top of the pile it had been feasting. He had no option but to go back up the tunnel. And try to descend the mountain. The south side of the mountain was mainly vertical, so his idea was to rappel seated down the majority of it. The flare had lasted the 20-minute climb to the entrance of the tunnel. Edward tossed the flare over the edge of the mountain, then dropped onto his knees with sheer exhaustion. The top half of his leg felt numb. A sharp, cold wind whipped around the mountaintop. Edward checked his watch again. 11:27 p.m. He had spent 2 hours down there. A dark, overcast night, the moon shone through the gaps in the cloud structure every now and again as the cold air enveloped Edward. Composing himself, he sluggishly opened his rucksack, pulling out his gear and oxygen, probably just enough for the descent he had in mind, although very dangerous. Securing his rappel harness, he tied a rescue 8. Through his figure 8 descender, placed his oxygen in his holster, and placed the breathing mask over his face. He lightened the load considerably in the rucksack, wrapping the gold bar in a fresh jumper that was inside, and rolling up the 27 pages of scriptures before making the first step off the edge. It was then the mountaintop lit up. The object had returned. Its deafening Alphorn sound infiltrated Edward's ears, causing him to throw his hands over his ears, which in turn caused him to jerk off the mountaintop. About a foot before his equipment locked on. Its deafening Alphorn sound infiltrated Edward's ears, causing him to throw his hands over his ears, which in turn caused him to jerk off the mountaintop about a foot before his equipment locked on, stopping him from free fall, but slamming him against the jagged rock wall, cutting open the top of his eye. Edward panicked as he quickly tried to start the rappel down, feeling dizzy in the process. The object hovered around the side towards him. Dangling from his ropes, Edward turned to see the craft behind him. It was hard to see a full view, as the bright red lights that flashed around the cigar-shaped object blinded his sight. A blue beam of light, the same as the creature encountered, illuminated Edward against the rock wall. He felt weightless as the rappel rope snapped free. At that point, Edward was rendered unconscious. His vision was blurred. A bright white light engulfed his eyesight. Dark, shadowy figures hovered above him. A loud hum invaded his ossicles. Filled with fear, his heart pounded as he once again slipped into unconsciousness. The sound of steady beeps from the ECG machine to the side of Edward brought him round from his sleepy state. An IV was attached to his arm, administering plasma. A nurse calmed him as he tried to jump off the bed in panic. "It's okay, Edward. Calm down. You've been in an accident," said the nurse sympathetically. "What?" replied Edward, confused. "You were found at the foot of Craggy Rock." "You are a very lucky man, Edward, sir." "You're a very lucky man, Edward. Air paramedics say you fell at least 250 feet with only a scratch on your head," said the nurse as she adjusted his bedsheets. "Where's my rucksack?" whispered an exhausted Edward. The nurse opened the bedside cupboard and produced the item. Edward grasped it from her quickly. He rummaged through the pack with haste, pulling the jumper that was wrapped around the gold. Only there was no gold. The scriptures were also missing. He threw the rucksack to the polished white hospital floor and shouted towards the nurse. "Where is it?" "I don't know what you mean, sir," replied the nurse, bemused. Edward's manic demeanor had forced the nurse to press the emergency buzzer, alerting 2 male doctors to the room. One held a syringe filled with haloperidol. Edward struggled as the 2 doctors held him down. Once again he drifted into unconsciousness as the doctor administered the calming jab. "He was talking in his sleep again. Didn't sound like any language I know. Just gobbledygook," said the nurse now, connecting the IV back into Edward's arm, which had been knocked out during the struggle. "Okay, nurse. Please keep your eye on him. We're still running tests on how it was possible for his survival." "Okay, nurse. Please keep your eye on him. We're still running tests on how it was possible for his survival," said the doctor as he wrote down his signature and the date, July 15th, 2017, on his medical chart. This was his 3rd day at the hospital. He had been missing for 10 days. The nurse checked the ECG before making her way to the door of the intensive care room, switching off the light before leaving. Edward lay silent, enveloped in deep sleep. Behind the lobe of his ear, underneath the layers of his skin, lay a microscopic gold transmitter that was emitting radio waves, inaudible to the human ear, and that was beyond any technology that Mother Earth had ever encountered. Inaudible to the human ear, and that was beyond any technology that Mother Earth had ever encountered. And that was beyond any technology that Mother Earth had ever encountered. Story 10. Seclusion. Professor Eric von Bleek, 1872. Journal entry number 11. Was it one of the shadow men I seen, tortured souls of the night between, other realms I'd never been? My quest to expose these urban myths of blood-feasting beasts from a world just like this, a parallel dimension, the wise ones called it, from a gateway outside of Earth's orbit. I slammed down my bottle and tried to think, what was this liquid red they drink? But then it dawned on me quite sudden. They'd killed the animals and left no blood on. I'd placed in the trap, the same as the rest to bait them from their evil nest, a lifeless carcass quite bereft, devoid of blood, from the holes in their necks. All I knew was that I was alone, in this strange, peculiar, unfamiliar zone. I'd crossed into their spiritual realm. I'd arrived from the portal, to there which they dwelled. It was 12 minutes past midnight in Denby Dunes. The silence was immense. The night owl sang its after-hours song, but was soon quietened by the howl once again from inside the woods. It had become more frequent after the professor placed 2 more traps out, now totaling 7. He had realized that these man-made traps were no match for the strange beings. 6 days in the log cabin, an identical cabin from where the professor had traveled from. The portal that brought him here had now collapsed back to its point of origin. Supplies were running low. The log fire burned the last of the firewood. He would need to chop more, but would have to wait till daylight. The shadow men moved from midnight till dawn. The doors and windows were barricaded from the inside. Lines of garlic salt trailed along the windowsill and along the bottom of the cabin's front door, a ritual the professor had undertaken the last few nights. The time was 1:27 a.m. The professor would have to stay awake once more until dawn, then he would sleep. Outside of the cabin, a low mist carpeted the floor of the woods. An eerie silence encapsulated the professor's surroundings. Sounds of woodland creatures were silenced as the dark shadows moved through the woods, searching for blood. He paused, then placed down the rag he was using to clean blood from his Springfield conversion rifle. He gently pulled back the flintlock and stared towards the door. He could hear one of them scuttling around, a foot or so from the cabin door. It shifted quickly around the back. The professor turned quickly in his chair, pointing the rifle. A loud thud from above caused the professor to point his rifle towards the roof of the cabin as the creature scurried up top. His breathing became irregular. As he held the rifle firm, the butt lodged into his shoulder blade, aiming towards the roof, waiting for movement before he took a blind shot through it and hopefully into the shadow. Professor Erich von Bleek, 1872, Journal Entry Number 12. I aimed my rifle towards the roof. This figureless beast becomes aloof. One single shot is what I'm after, to take down one from the rafter. I sit in silence and wait for it to move and seal its fate. But before I could even fire the rifle, one more arrival to join and rival. One shot's what I needed, but now need two. Is this what's become of you? Fighting demons to make your time pass? I took the shot and reloaded fast. A sound I'd never heard before as the shadowman fell from the roof to the floor. The second now sounded like it had made a dash from above and down into the woodland pass. I waited for a second coming, at least an hour, before my eyes were blurring. My exhaustion overcame me. So tired, I fell asleep before nighttime expired. The professor awoke, started, grabbing his rifle in panic. Daylight spilled through the cracks of the cabin's boarded-up window. He buttoned up his coat and adjusted his nap felt hat, making his way to the cabin front door and removed the wooden plank barricade that crisscrossed the doorframe. A beam of bright sunlight invaded the professor's eyes. He shielded them with the palm of his hand. His rifle tucked under his armpit, he made his way around the cabin to where he had heard it drop. The cabin's exterior was once again covered in the black residue that the shadows seemed to exhale. He had seen one on his first day. He watched from the cabin window as it exhaled a kind of mist into the face of a deer. It was Rendell docile. Small twigs snapped underfoot as the professor arrived to where the beast had dropped, to find nothing but scorched ground. He walked towards the woods, the animals in his traps once again stripped of life and drained of blood. He did not take the time to reset the traps, for it was no use, and tonight was his final night before his servant from his home realm would activate the portal at dawn for his return journey, a journey that many had ventured but never succeeded. He knew why, and he knew now the truth of these beings. Their purpose was solely to hunt for food in their own vicious dimension. He was unable to catch one, as last night's attempt had proven that once immobilized by a bullet, this resulted in dissipation of the subject. The professor pondered, taking in the beautiful woodland greenery. A clearing gave sight to dunes in the distance and a faint glimpse of the ocean. Sweet sounds of vibrant animal life echoed around the woods. He wondered how this exuberant landscape turned into the pits of hell after hours. He walked casually back to the cabin. The sound of his axe splitting the firewood echoed through the woods. He pulled a handkerchief from his breast pocket and wiped the sweat from his brow before making his way into the cabin with the ash logs. The thump of wood was amplified inside the cabin as he dropped them into the storage compartment. A pot of venison broth bubbled away on the stove as he made preparations for his final night. Dusk approached. The professor set the fire ablaze and hammered the barricades back into place. He poured himself a bowl of the skinny broth, kicked off his boots to warm his feet. Steam rose from the bowl as the professor carefully sipped the hot, steaming brown mixture. The log fire blazed as the bowl slipped from the professor's hand onto the bear-skinned rug with a thud. His snoring muffled the sound. It was the noise of shuffling on the roof that stirred him from his rest. Professor Erich von Bleek, 1872, Journal Entry Number 13. Once again the night crept in, stirring me from my sleepless dream. These shadow creatures God-forsaken, I'll fight till the end and not be taken. I turned to grab my flintlock rifle when realized my throat felt stifled. For earlier, when chopping wood, I'd left the rifle that stained with blood. It lay outside with the faceless creatures. For now I feel my fate is sealed. Without defense, my cards revealed. A hole was punched straight through the ceiling. These shadow men were now revealing. Their transparent darkness consumed the cabin. I sat in shock wondering what might happen. Then all of a sudden, their howling breath expelled a kind of potion mist that made my mind awash with bliss. Feelings of greatness, ecstasy, and joy. My fear for them was now deployed. As I quickly write to finish this chapter, their figureless shadow fills my soul with rapture. Professor Erich von Bleek's assistant picked up the Springfield, tossed it around his neck, adjusted the rifle's strap, closed the journal, and headed back into the beaten, torn-apart cabin. Black residue was scattered from floor to ceiling. It was 11:59. The assistant placed the journal to one side and finished pouring the last of the gasoline on the inside of the cabin from one of the 3 large containers he had brought before tossing it to one side. The assistant then picked back up the professor's journal and waited, facing the front door to the cabin. He pulled a box of large lucifer matches and struck one, igniting angrily, lighting up the cabin for a brief second. He puffed on a cigarette and watched patiently as the darkness approached from the woods as the time reached midnight. Behind him the portal opened. A swirling mass of multicolored light engulfed the room. The tail from his tweed coat flapped manically behind him, unsteady underfoot as the portal tried to pull him in. The assistant stood firm. He could see them approaching the door. He flicked the match, and as if in slow motion, it fell slowly to the ground. The assistant threw himself backwards as the match ignited the gasoline. With a fiery roar, the cabin and its surroundings set ablaze. The portal closed, and the surrounding wood where the portal lay was consumed with flames. Screams of pain echoed through the blazing woods as the army of shadowmen were consumed by the ferocious inferno. Story 11. Kuri's Quest for Courage. Mare Serenitatis, Taurus, Littrow Valley, 1972. Kuri, model number 13, was the smartest of the small robot community back home, and way smarter than her brother and her big sister. An enthusiastic little soul, it was the perfect planet that they called home, a peaceful, robotic utopia. A thunderous noise woke Kuri from sleep mode. It had been years now since she had seen any craft other than her own, especially this close. She looked around, evaluating her surroundings with precision. She had scoured the southeastern edge area many times. She and her mother had taken what they needed from the surface. That was 20 years ago, when her mother left her behind. She had no choice but to launch without her. Kuri's circuits were fried after an accident at the crater. Her momentum was out of sync, causing her to wobble unsteadily, rendering her too slow to return to the craft with her mother. Kuri's mother was burdened with the minerals they needed to sustain life for their expanding world. Minerals that could only be found here were the perfect composition for an expanded construction of more advanced robots back home. Their world, just beyond the Kepler belt, was in need of more material. They had depleted their resources and needed more. Kuri's uncanny knowledge of the cosmos was unfathomable. Her microprocessors were highly attuned more than any other of her home planet droids. She was the only one that knew the location for their mining venture. Her mother could have released her payload, helped and escaped with Kuri, but then the fate of Kuri's world was in jeopardy. Her mother had told her of the risks she would undertake, and that the craft was automatically timed for launch, whether they were on board or not, and it was impossible for her mother to override the launch codes. Her mother scurried quickly towards the craft, boarding without her. Kuri's mechanics whined as she tried her best to catch up, watching her mother in the pod window as the craft launched, making its return flight. It was no use. Kuri had tried so hard, but she just did not have the power to catch up. She would need to make repairs before she could be back to normal, but there was no time as the pod lifted off. The repeated code relayed in Kuri's computer unit, her mother's message constantly looping, reassuring her she would be back, until the communication failed its signal lost as the craft blasted into quantum speed. Kuri stood motionless for years, staring towards the exact path her mother's craft had journeyed into, the dark cosmic abyss. Her little robotic structure was beaten by the planet's harsh weathering, Kuri's shiny, smooth body now scuffed from the dust storms. She had patched on makeshift pieces of metal to her body from where microorganisms had made holes. She had designed her charging pad to run off the solar rays that frequented the planet. Every now and again, she entered sleep mode to reserve power. Kuri now knew that the arriving craft was approaching the surface. She experienced a flush of emotions as the retros fired, emitting a heavy thrusting sound. So she made a deftly swift dash up and around the surrounding rock area of the dusty gray plateau, quite a distance from where the craft was approaching. But her vision was advanced enough to zoom in on the visitors. She moved quicker than any other of the droids back home and knew the quickest route out of there. Peeping from around the cold, frosty rock where Kuri hid herself, she noticed it was not a ship from her home planet. Her heart light dimmed as her excitement turned to sorrow as she became aware of this, but quickly becoming intrigued as to who it could be. A cloud of dust and vapor engulfed the landed craft before settling. The hatch opened, and Kuri watched as a figure she had never encountered before, but had heard about in her robotic school days, descended down the ladders from the side of the craft. Kuri enhanced her visuals, targeting onto the strange white bubbled suit and bulbous glass-domed headwear the visitor wore. It seemed to walk the way she had seen from her memory, but its molecular structure seemed wrong. She was cautious. Her instincts as a friendly, intelligent system tempted her to show herself and hope they could help her and maybe take her along for the ride and travel to where they were going. It was too much of a risk. The visitors were not to be trusted. These were the stories she had heard back home, and anyway, her mother could return any time soon. She said she would be back. Kuri was lonely and afraid. She sighed and let another whine of sorrow seep from her circuits as she once again flickered her eyelids, switching back to sleep mode as the visitors began to investigate the surroundings of the plateau. There was no recollection of time as Kuri flicked open her eyes and blinked to adjust her visuals. She looked towards the craft. It seemed to be preparing for takeoff. Kuri remembered the day her mother had told her, "You must have courage along with your intelligence. Be brave, Kuri. Find your courage." The words enveloped her mainframe. As she made a dash towards the craft at lightning speed, her mapping sensors locked as she weaved in and out of the small rocks and indentations on the plateau floor. She traveled faster than she had ever traveled. A cloud of dust trailed behind. As the drive system propelled her speeding wheels, she approached quickly, locking herself to the outside of the bottom of the craft. Kuri attached the tether that extended from her utility compartment. It fused into the craft's metal frame. She then engaged the safety radiation heat shield which encased her robotic structure. She had no idea how long she had been here, but she knew she could not stay on this planet a minute longer. Her systems would not allow it. Her whole being was to help and be loved. The craft roared and lifted with great ferocity. "Woo!" shouted Kuri with excitement, wrapped snug and safe inside her suit as the craft shot into the dark. Her mother smiled through the pod window of her approaching craft, showing a happy but tearful expression as she watched Kuri clinging onto the craft, making her way towards the visitor's planet. She never let go of her mission to return for Kuri. She wanted to tell her of all the great things that have happened back home, great things that would not have been possible without Kuri's brave sacrifice. Her mother was satisfied at that point that Kuri had found her courage. She was special and knew she was destined for greater things. Although her mother was too late and saddened, she knew that Kuri would be welcomed, learned from, and be able to tell her stories of how she came to be and also loved on that place that they call Earth. Story 12. Keyboard Killer. Chapter 1. "Damn it," raged Blake as he saw the 404-page missing prompt again. He typed into the search bar once more, this time with the caps lock on. His friend Tom had told him about the website. He said it was right up his street. Blake was unsure. He knew the type of stuff Tom was into. The search connected to the site, a black screen with a circular red widget in the center. The word "click" centered inside of it flashed a neon green. Blake pondered, his finger lightly tapping on the left click, but not enough pressure to access. He slid the mouse aside and picked up his mobile, selecting Tom from his friends list. "Hey, Blake." "Hi, Tom. A question on this site." "Oh yeah, are you in yet?" replied Tom. "I'm looking at it," said Blake. "Right. Well, that's not going to work. You need to click that button," mocked Tom. "Yeah, I get that concept. Problem is, what's after the click?" said Blake inquisitively. "Can't tell you that, mate. Part of the rules," said Tom sincerely. Blake laughed. "What rules?" scoffed Blake. "Them's the rules. Listen, I gotta go. Jane's just pulled into the drive." "Just click on it," replied Tom, as he watched Jane through the window pull up in the brand new Ferrari he had just bought, cash. "Hello?" Blake looked at his phone. Tom had ended the call. Blake put down his phone and palmed his mouse, hovering his cursor over the click prompt he contemplated. Blake huffed and shook his head in an unconcerned manner before he clicked. There was a ping sound as the page flashed and redirected to another page that looked exactly like the previous, only this one had a different prompt in the center. "Are you sure?" There was no yes or no option as Blake clicked. This time the page redirected to the home page to the site. Again, a black screen containing the site's rules and instructions in white bold text. Blake began to read. "Welcome to Cash for Life. Congratulations for making the step towards making your life easier. You will now be asked a series of 13 questions. This will determine whether you are eligible for the Cash for Life program. Please answer all questions honestly before submitting. If accepted, your answers will determine the category you will be placed in. There are 2 categories, giver, receiver. Sometimes an applicant may have the option to choose what his/her category choice shall be. As a giver, your position within the community will be to execute the command prompt within 4 hours of receiving your mail. Failure to do so will result in exclusion from CFL. You will receive £1,000 for each prompt execution to a maximum of 10. If you decide to take 10 prompt executions, you will then be given the opportunity to switch your category and become a receiver. You may cash out after 1 execution prompt as a giver by clicking the Cash and Opt Out button in the top left of your profile page. Once this option is chosen, your payments will be forwarded to your specified account in your profile settings page. Also, your details and account will be permanently deleted from the CFL database. As a receiver, your position within the community will be simple. You are awarded an upfront payment, £50,000 for every prompt execution that you avoid. Question 1. Have you ever committed a violent act? Yes. No. Blake clicked no. He took a sip of his energy before proceeding. Chapter 2. 1 month ago. Billy Henson shivered as he stood at the edge of Bishop's Bridge. Tears had dried on his aged face. Receiver 27 had his wife and daughter hostage. He watched as 27 roughly tied up his family via his virtual view spectacles. "Okay. Now all you need to do is jump. Make it a good suicide. I've got your pretty little family here. We don't want anything to happen to them now, do we?" yelled 27 sarcastically, teasing a Bowie knife against the cheek of Billy's wife. His daughter screamed hysterically before 27 cracked the side of her skull with the butt of the shotgun, rendering her unconscious. Okay, I'll do it." "You won't get away with this. It's against the community rules. I'm a giver, for God's sake." "This is the only way they're gonna listen. By upsetting the balance of that goddamn community," seethed 27 as he tied a gag around his wife's mouth. "Look, we can work this out. There's a way of retracting the prompt. You can hack the system. If you found me as your giver, then you know how to get in," said Billy compassionately. "I've tried that. Do you think I'm stupid? There's something totally wrong with CFL. This is the only way I can cash and opt out my own way," replied 27 menacingly, pushing the knife harder against his wife's cheekbone. Her eyes bulged with fear. "For God's sake, don't hurt her. I have the codes to remove you from the database. It will be like you never existed," said Billy. "What codes? I've already tried all that." "I can do it, 27. I created CFL." Receiver 27 released the pressure on the knife and piloted the drone around close to Billy's face. A bitter chill lashed against his cheek as he balanced himself on the edge of the bridge. "You created it?" said 27 with surprise. "Yes." "Wow. So you can do that? Take me off the system?" "Sure. How long have you been with CFL?" said Billy, projecting a comforting tone. 2 years now. I'm another one of the unfortunate ones who didn't read the small print on the receiver rules. I just can't keep running." "So you'll help?" said Receiver 27 coyly. I will. I'll help you, 27. Billy crossed his arms, rubbing them up and down, trying to shake off the chill. Suddenly, the drone veered off to the left and crashed into the girder of the bridge. Billy, slightly shocked, stepped onto the rail side of the bridge and ran quickly to the black Lamborghini he'd arrived in. Doors! He shouted. The driver door slid smoothly open. Climbing in, he pressed the preset journey automator. The door slid smoothly shut. Home. Calculating journey distance. Lexi, his onboard conduit slave, ran the numbers for his journey home. Blue neon lit up the magnetic highway as the vehicle hummed into the distance. Inside Billy Henson's beach house, Kelly, his daughter, began to untie her mother. She had already tied Receiver 27 to the drinks cabinet. Blood trickled down his head from the flower vase Kelly had smashed over it. Chapter 3. Blake provided the answers to the 5 questions that were required to evaluate his eligibility for CFL. He hovered his cursor over the Submit button and clicked. The page read, Evaluating Results. It took about 5 seconds until the site made the decision. The screen read, Congratulations and welcome to CFL. Your assigned category is Giver. Please click on the Proceed button below to access your profile page. Blake clicked and was directed to a standard web profile. He clicked on Mail. Welcome to CFL. Here is where you will find your prompt requests. Please be sure to add notification alerts to your cell phone. Your first prompt will be in 4 hours from now, and every 4 hours after that, until you reach your maximum of 10. You must execute your prompt within 4 hours of your next prompt. Failure to do so will result in exclusion from CFL and may incur a further penalty. Remember, you may cache and opt out after your first prompt. We highly recommend that you stay your duration for a chance to switch categories. Blake leaned back in his chair and stared at the message, a little uneasy of the prospect of the new rule that had been added, which wasn't there upon sign-up, and may incur a further penalty. He checked his watch, 8:30 a.m. He would receive his prompt at 12:30 p.m. Leaning forward, Blake palmed his mouse and shut down his computer before heading out of his bedroom. Making his way down the stairs, he grabbed his rucksack and baseball cap that was heavily stained with grease from the 3 years of wear working at the Flippin' Beef burger joint, a job that he loathed, but this was the only way that he could save to open his own restaurant. Maybe CFL could speed up that savings, thought Blake. Blake? I put some fresh fruit and a couple of tuna sandwiches in your rucksack, said Sarah, shouting from the kitchen to the right of the stairs. Sarah had been Blake's flat share tenant for the last 3 years now. They went to Stanmore College together and had been friends since they were 8. Blake had spent the majority of his childhood at his grandparents' and also at Sarah's parents. At the age of 7, he lost his parents in a car crash. Thanks, Sarah. I'm on a split shift, so I'll catch up with you around 11:30 if you're still around, said Blake. Yeah, I should be. I'll see you then, replied Sarah as she raised a mug of coffee to her lips. Blake gave her a thumbs up as he made his way out of the basement flat, up the stairs, out onto the street, and into his beat-up old Honda Civic parked at the curb. Blake started up the engine and headed off down 6th Avenue, towards the motorway for a 6-mile trip to his workplace at the Flippin' Beef. He breathed heavy as he picked up his running pace. Receiver 22 had been running now for the last 2 hours. His chest burned with exhaustion. Sweat had drenched his body. He quickly turned into an alley and hid behind a construction skip. His heart pounded as he watched nervously. He could hear them coming. He hoped they would drive past and not see him. He had tried to dismantle his tracker, but only made a bloody mess to his neck, trying to gouge it out. 22 reached into his combat trousers and pulled out his plasma pistol. He had only 1 charge left. If he could take this last CFL unit, he was in the clear. He'd avoided 9. This would enable him to cache and opt out. He watched as the blacked-out Escalade hovered into view. 22 set the pulse switch on the pistol. It made a sound similar to switching on night vision goggles. The Escalade stopped at the entrance to the alley. 22 prepared his shot. The Escalade shot out of view as 22 lined up the shot. Damn it! He cursed. He placed his pistol back in the pocket of his combats. On doing so, 22 heard the sound of a bottle being knocked behind him. He quickly turned around, but he was not quick enough, as the CFL soldier behind him slammed down his pulse sword straight through 22's skull. Chapter 4. The wind howled as they traveled at around 50 miles per hour. Rain beat down onto the windscreen of the vehicle. The wipers struggled to deal with the heavy onslaught of large raindrops, impairing Blake's father's vision. They had been in a heated argument since they left the restaurant. Blake's mother was always the one to start an argument over such menial matters. It only took a second for his mother to distract his father. He swerved to avoid a felled tree in the road. The wet road surface caused the vehicle to spin into a barrier, tossing the car into a ravine 30 feet below. Glass tumbled around inside the vehicle, seemingly in a slow-motion effect, as it barrel rolled down the hill. Blake's mother was tossed through the passenger seat window, her safety belt unfastened, her limp body wrapped around a tree. Blake's father, although strapped in, bled to death as a tree branch pierced through the windscreen, punching a hole through his chest. Blake cried in the car seat behind, showered in glass, but unharmed. "Blake! Blake!" The manager of the Flippin' Beef shouted over at Blake. He heard the distant voice as he came back to reality from one of his flashback episodes. "Stop daydreaming! We need another tray of coleslaw," shouted Gus, Blake's manager. "Okay, I'm on it," replied Blake as he headed into the back of the kitchen. Gathering the ingredients for the slaw, he placed them onto the prep table. Looking at the clock above him, it read 11 a.m. Blake finished his morning shift in 30 minutes. His prompt was at 12:30 p.m. 1 month ago. Inside the technologically advanced headquarters of CFL, Dr. Billy Henson, head of tech logistics and creator of the CFL software, made the final check to the weaponry inside the lab. "Great work. I see you've made the adjustments to the plasma pistol," inquired Dr. Henson. "Yes, sir. We've increased the distance on the pulse to 50 extra feet," he replied assertively. "Excellent," said Blake, acknowledging the assistant's work with a firm handshake, as he walked on by through the brightly illuminated lab. To the far right, tests to the pulse sword were being carried out. A lab assistant swiped the sword at a 45-degree angle, slicing through a pig's torso like butter. "Attention. Dr. Henson, could you please report to briefing? Thank you." The computer voiced its demand over the speaker system. Dr. Henson made his way over to the electro-lift to take him to the 4th-floor briefing room. On arrival, he was met by the president and vice president of the CFL community. "We have a problem, Bill," said the vice president with concern. "These kind of things should not be happening," said the VP in an awkward tone. "Last night we had info on a receiver who was not playing by the rules. He has made an attempt to remove his tracker, and now he's on the loose somewhere in Stanford Mega City. His tracker is still working, but with slight glitches." "Okay, I will deal with this one myself. I can assure you that I will have this situation under control before the end of the day," said Dr. Henson with sincerity. The vice president handed him the transparent info pad with all the details to receiver 27. The tracking beacon displayed his position as 16 miles away. The president and vice left the office. Dr. Henson left momentarily after. Chapter 5. "You have reached your destination," voiced Lexi's GPS system as Dr. Henson pulled into the drive of the beach house. Inside, Kelly Henson sat next to receiver 27, brandishing a shotgun from Dr. Henson's gun cabinet. Christine Henson, the doctor's wife, leaned on the kitchen counter, facing Kelly and 27. Dr. Henson walked in, moving quickly over to his wife. "You okay, honey?" he said as he hugged her. "I'm fine," she replied. Dr. Henson then made his way over to Kelly, asking the same question. She nodded in acknowledgement. The doctor gave her a reassuring kiss on the forehead. His attention then shifted towards receiver 27. He took the shotgun from his daughter, walked over to the drinks cabinet, and prodded him in the shoulder with his shotgun. He slowly came round. "Kelly, could you grab a wet towel and the first aid kit from the garage? He's bleeding all over my goddamn floor," seethed the doc. "Sure," replied Kelly, as she made her way out the back of the beach house. There was a minute of silence as they waited for him to come round. Kelly brought back the first aid and the towel. The doc's wife began to clean up his forehead. "How did you find my home?" Dr. Henson shouted into his face. He just stared at him. The doc shoved him with the shotgun once again. "I said, how the hell did you find this house?" The doc's tone elevated. Okay, easy with that thing," he replied, referring to the sharp pain he received from the shotgun's barrels. "I hacked into the CFL database. I think you're going to need to tighten your security protocol. A 5-year-old could access your software," mocked 27. Christine finished bandaging his head. He shrieked as the doc jabbed the shotgun harder into his shoulder. "You show me how you found that back door," said Dr. Henson, breathing hard as he tossed a laptop onto its thighs. The doc asked Kelly to untie him from the drinks cabinet. He moved the shotgun to his forehead. "Any funny business, and I'll blow your head off," he rasped. "I've done nothing wrong. CFL is corrupt. I've avoided 11 prompts. The site is full of lies. 10 is a maximum, and yet I'm still being hunted. It's bullshit. There's no cache and opt-out option," ranted 27 as he switched on the power to the laptop. "The password is Henson CFL, said the doc, dismissing his rant. The transparent keyboard illuminated a low green neon glow. He typed the password. "Look, it makes no difference whether I show you or not of how to get in the program." "Show me," shouted the doc, pushing the shotgun harder into his forehead. Kelly stood to the left of him. Christine was on his right. The doc's face in front of him contorted in an angry fashion as he trained the shotgun at his forehead. He deftly lifted the laptop upright, knocking the shotgun out of Doc's hands. To the side of 27 was a shard of the broken vase. He deftly lifted the laptop upright, knocking the shotgun out of Doc's hands. To the side of 27 was a shard of broken vase. He quickly picked it up, jumping up and shoved it straight into Christine's throat. Blood spurted across the room as she ran manically towards the kitchen, slumping onto the sink. He jumped onto the dock and wrapped his blood-soaked hands around his neck and began to strangle him. Kelly jumped on his back, grabbing at his hair. He shrugged her off. She was flung to the side of the shotgun. She picked it up and aimed toward him. His quick reaction enabled him to pull the dock on top of him as Kelly took the shot. The shotgun's pellets peppered the doc's back. He tossed the body off him and headed towards Kelly. The shotgun clicked as she pulled the trigger on the second barrel, which had an empty chamber. Clenching his fist, he punched Kelly straight in her face. She toppled backwards, banging her head on the coffee table. Blood trickled over the bridge of her nose as she lay unconscious. He grabbed the laptop and the keys to the Lamborghini before heading out. Getting into the car, he started up the engine. "Welcome, Dr. Henson. Select your destination, please." Lexi's automatic GPS system engaged. "Stanford Megacity." Voice recognition fail. Lexi's voice replied with a less welcoming tone. He punched a combination of numbers into the digital panel on the dash. System override. Manual drive now in operation. He hit the accelerator, swiftly moving off towards Stanford Megacity. Inside the beach house, the bodies of the doc and his wife lay still in a bloody mess. Kelly flickered her eyelids and wiped the blood from her eyes. Chapter 6. Present day. Tom logged out and closed the lid of his laptop, just as his girlfriend walked through the door. "Did you get my 3D prints? The structural planning is tomorrow," said Jane as she put down her bag and car keys, dashing straight upstairs. Jane, an architect for West Tech Construction, was working on the structural design of a new shopping complex to be built in Stanford City. Tom had been in relations for the last year now. He met her at an art exhibition, a piece of work she liked at the gallery he paid for as a gift, leading to a coffee. The rest was history. He had explained to Jane that he had won a considerably large amount on the state whiz-ball lottery, but in reality, he was just an old-school hacker, and it was CFL that was funding his lavish lifestyle. "Yeah, they're in your study. How was your day?" he shouted from the bottom of the stairs. "Stressful," replied Jane with an emphasis on her locution. "Okay then," said Tom sarcastically. His attempt to make conversation was thwarted. It was Jane's blueprint presentation in an hour, so she had to change. His conversation was put on the back burner. "On," said Tom. The holographic TV above the fireplace illuminated into view. Local news streamed on Channel 30. Setting up 2 mugs in the kitchen, he prepared coffee for himself and Jane. Still no leads on the recent spate of the high-tech murders in and around Stanford City. Frederick Stevens, 46, is the latest victim to fall foul of what people are calling organized killings. The images you are about to see are graphic. Please be advised. The TV showed pictures of an alleyway. A body lay against a construction skip. A burnt skull showed telltale signs of a pulse sword strike. He stopped stirring the coffee and stared at the TV. He knew right away from the other half of his skull that still remained that it was receiver 22. "Off," said Tom. The TV vanished. "Could you zip this for me, babe?" Jane came bouncing down the stairs, her hands fiddling with the clasp on her earrings. "Sure," said Tom, as he slowly pulled together the back of her dress and pulled up the zipper. "Are you sure you don't want to come?" questioned Jane. No, I'm fine, baby. I got a little writing to catch up on, and besides, I won't fit in with all the bigwigs at the show. I'll be with you tomorrow, giving my full support with the presentation of your prints, replied Tom as he reached the top of the dress. He turned Jane around and kissed her lips gently. They looked into each other's eyes for a second, before Jane dashed off again. Could you make that coffee to go, babe? She said, as she slipped on her shoes at the front door. Sure, he smiled. Jane's lust for life always intrigued him. He passed her the coffee and a thermos. She slipped on a jacket from the coat rack next to the door over her black dress. I should be back in a couple of hours. Wish me luck, said Jane as she took the thermos from Tom. She kissed him on the cheek and headed back to her car. You don't need it, he replied, watching from the front door. Jane smiled and started up the Ferrari. Tom watched as she left Bareback Crescent, a quiet suburb where they lived. He closed the front door and returned to his laptop. He needed to keep up to date with the emails from CFL. According to them, the Henson family were off on a European camping holiday for a couple of months, a little break after the elimination of receiver 27. 27 had turned the car around back to the beach house and cleaned the murder evidence. He was a little unnerved to find only 2 bodies there, and was unsure why Kelly had not told CFL of her parents' double murder. Tom had to be on his guard from now on. He would take a quick look at the CFL receiver and give her software logs before driving over to Blake's flat for a visit. He typed in the password, Henson CFL. Accessing the CFL database, he waited as the information was loaded. He stared out of the window at the black Lamborghini parked in the driveway. Chapter 7. Tossing his baseball cap onto the stairs banister, Blake checked his watch, 12:26 p.m. Sarah? Shouted Blake as he closed his front door behind him. There was no reply. He quickly sat down at his computer desk and powered up his system. Logging into CFL, Blake accessed his profile page. A timer at the top of the site counted down the 4 minutes that remained. To the left was a list of receivers with a prompt saying, "Please choose one within 4 hours." He scrolled down the list. Each receiver had a number and a short bio of themselves. Blake clicked on one randomly. Receiver 75 has an extensive background in assault, rape, and armed robbery. 75 has evaded imprisonment on several occasions due to lack of evidence and witness intimidation. A great choice. CFL recommends 3 out of 5 stars. If you would like to assign a giver to this selection, please click the Alt key now. Blake laughed, still unsure what assigning a giver even meant. He was more interested in the payments. An online game paying him for clicking a few prompts and pressing a few keys. Easy, he thought. He clicked the Alt key and was redirected to the giver's profiles. There was a list of only 20. There were at least 200 receivers. He scrolled down once more, again randomly selecting one. Blake read the bio. Giver 17 has an extensive background in law enforcement. Once an officer for Stanford Police Department, his career was cut short due to using his own kind of justice. His wife was murdered by an intruder that entered the family home. Skilled in the use of pulse swords, electron nets, and neutron grenades. Giver 17 is a great choice for those tough receivers. CFL recommends 4 out of 5 stars. If you would like to assign this giver, please click the Alt key now. Blake clicked. The page now read, "Thank you. Your selections are as follows. Your giver is 17 and your receiver is 75. Please click the Alt key one final time to execute your prompt." Blake hesitated. He wasn't sure if these profiles he had chosen were just avatars in a game or not. Again, just thinking of the money, he clicked. Redirected back to his profile page, his message box was highlighted. He clicked. "Thank you for your selection. Your prompt has been assigned to Giver 17 to execute Receiver 75. Your account balance has been credited. Your next prompt will be 4 hours from now and must be executed within 4 hours. Thanks again, CFL." The time was now 12:42 p.m. Blake looked bewildered as he clicked his account wallet. Balance, £1,000. Blake put his hands around his head. Leaning back on his chair, he laughed. "Doesn't make sense," thought Blake. The doorbell rang. Blake logged out and made his way to the door. He slid the door catch off and unlocked, opening the door. Tom stood outside holding a 6-pack of beer and a smile on his face. Chapter 8. His shoe felt damp, but not damp from sweat, but blood. He had no time to put on his socks. The only shoes that were available to him at that moment were his stiff dinner shoes. His heel was raw as he rubbed through a blister, and now the hard leather rubbed his raw flesh. 75 had been on the run for the last hour. Sweat drenched his hoodie as he made his way around the outskirts of Stanford City Plaza. His tracker pulsed like a heartbeat. He noticed once more out of his peripheral vision the red light that penetrated through the skin on his neck, that his giver was within 500 yards. He would have to get out of the tracking grid and up deep into the forest where the signal dissipates. He had been told that a splinter group of receivers had made it there and had set up their own community. They all tried to remove the tracker, but to no avail. Everyone bloodied their own neck. They could never be removed manually. CFL controlled the track mapping system. Disconnection via the control settings in the software was the only way to electronically remove the tracker, or surgically removed via the tracker extraction tool located at CFL. He had to stop. He was close now to the mouth of the forest, but the searing pain caused him to rest. It was risky, but he could not carry on. He ripped the arm off his hoodie. He tore a second piece and fashioned it to fit around his heel. He seethed in pain as he slid back on his shoe. 75 gathered himself and carried on a slow pace, slightly limping with each step. He was around 35 feet from the forest when he spotted the yellow neon glow from the edge of the forest. It signaled only one thing. Giver 17 had deployed a neutron grenade. 75 screamed in pain as the grenade pulsed a sheet of white light towards him, blinding him momentarily, whilst inducing a third-degree burn to his hands and face. There was no time to gather himself, as the electron net spun an electric dome 8 feet in diameter around his crumpled body. It vibrated around him. One touch of the net would result in 10,000 volts screaming through his body. He sobbed, heavily crunching twigs underfoot as he approached. He could see Giver 17, blacked-out suit with weaponry wrapped around a utility belt. "Please, you can take my balance. I'll give you my password. I have 313,000 pounds in there," 75 pleaded. "Do you really think I need money?" replied 17. His voice, computer-generated, was manipulated by the voice disguise attached to his helmet. "Please, man. I got a family. I signed up for this just to make a little money, bro. Nobody told me it was in real life, man. I thought it was just a stupid computer game," said 75, trying his best to sympathize with 17. "Well, you know what they say. Always read the small print," mocked 17 as he powered up his pulse sword. "No!" screamed 75 as 17 drove the sword downwards, straight into 75's cranium, Excalibur style. The edge of the forest lay silent as the neutron net fizzled out. Picking up the neutron unit, 17 placed it back in his belt for a recharge back at CFL headquarters. 17 to base. Do you copy? "Go ahead, 17, replied Base Command, a separate industrial unit based at the site of CFL headquarters. "Requesting immediate extraction. 75 is down. I repeat, 75 is down. Over." "Copy that. Aerial unit is on its way. ETA, 7 minutes. Over," replied Base. "Copy that," replied 17 as he walked to a small clearing through the smoke of the neutron grenade. He could already hear the humming of the CFL Thunderblade choppers as they hovered his way. He sat himself on a rock, took off his helmet, which produced a blast of air from the pressurized suit. He wiped the sweat from his beard and lit up one of the exclusive Cuban cigars. Sure, he now had the best execution time for the CFL leaderboard. He would have to check the stats. "I'll take the fat banker off the top spot," 17 waffled to himself, encased in a cloud of rich Cuban smoke. Above him, the chopper hovered in whisper mode. Chapter 9. 2 miles from Stanford Megacity, inside a motel room, Kelly Henson picked up a large green duffel bag from the bed and headed out to an awaiting CFL black Escalade. She got into the passenger side. "The suit, as requested. Do you have any weaponry?" said Xavier Gonzalez, the president of CFL. "Yes, I have a stun pistol and a net. That's all I need," said Kelly, pointing to the duffel. "Good. If you need replacements, I can have a CFL soldier drop them for you. Are you sure you want to do this yourself?" said Xavier. "I'm sure," she replied. "Very well. I need him alive, Kelly. I understand your need for vengeance. You will get your time." Kelly nodded as she put the suit inside her duffel. 27's tracker has been disconnected. But inside your father's laptop, there's a beacon. Here is the tracking device. Once the laptop is turned on, your display will evaluate his location. Xavier opened his briefcase and handed the transparent cellular phone-sized tracker to Kelly. It will automatically engage once he switches on the laptop. Kelly nodded in acknowledgement and placed it inside the duffel. She got out of the Escalade, threw the duffel over her shoulder, and waved goodbye to Xavier before making her way over to her vehicle. Tom flipped the tops off 2 beers and passed one to Blake. "So, how did you get on with the site?" questioned Tom. "I signed up, and I've executed my first prompt. Thing is, I have no idea why such a simple task has earned me 1,000 pounds, laughed Blake. "Let me show you something," said Tom as he took Dr. Henson's laptop from a bag at the side of him. Blake sat by his desktop as Tom placed the laptop on the coffee table facing him. He pushed the standby button. The CFL logo lit up on the startup screen. "Wait, is that a CFL program running on that?" asked Blake. "It's more than a program. This is the laptop of the creator of CFL." "What? How the hell have you got that?" replied Blake with surprise. "It's a long story," said Tom, now accessing the CFL database. Blake took a sip of his beer and watched Tom quickly type. "Wait a minute," said Tom, a little bemused as the laptop screen read "Access denied." "Something's wrong here. I think they've shut me out." "Shut you out of what? What's going on, Tom?" Blake asked with concern. Tom carried on frantically typing away at the keyboard, trying to override the system. Each time it said "Access denied." "God damn it!" Tom quickly closed the laptop and rubbed his hand over his head. "We might be in danger," Tom stressed to Blake. "In danger?" replied Blake. "We're going to have to leave now. Let's go. I'll explain in the car," demanded Tom. Tom knew that if they had blocked his access, then they were smart enough to locate his whereabouts. The tracker pinpointed the location of the laptop. Kelly started up the black sports car and headed toward 6th Avenue, Stanford. Chapter 10. Good morning, gentlemen, and congratulations. You are the final 20 that have been selected for the CFL program. If you would like to follow me, I'll take you down to the training area. Now, I know some of you are already experts in weaponry, but here at CFL, our ammunitions department is far beyond your usual gun club, said Xavier Gonzalez officially. I doubt that, said Henry Kimmler, CEO of Stanford Bank and Trust. Oh, Mr. Kimmler, I can assure you of that, smirked Xavier. The group of 20, Stanford's rich and elite businessmen, all dressed in the high-tech CFL soldier suits, followed Xavier down a brightly illuminated corridor towards the entrance of the CFL Industrial Weapons Testing Unit. Good afternoon, President Gonzalez. The computer-voiced iris recognition door entry system greeted him. Large steel doors to the facility slid smoothly open. On entry, an array of weaponry lay on metal tables. In front of the tables was the assault course, displaying a number of strategically placed mannequins. Here you will learn the basics of CFL weapons technology. If you would like to select your weapons of choice, you may select up to 3 items that are specifically designed to connect to your utility belt on your suits, said Xavier, waving his arm towards the tables. The group made their way over to the tables. Now, what we have here are the finest in pulse and electron units. Each piece of equipment has a different usage. For example, the neutron net that you are holding, Mr. Gomez, will deploy an 8-foot in diameter net, which is perfect for close-quarter encounters with your assigned receiver. You have all been assigned a given number, which will correspond with the leader board. At the moment, as you can see, you are all set at 0 on the board. Each week, the leaderboard will be updated to show the current frontrunner in the game. It will consist of kills and times of your kills, said Xavier, pointing towards the neon leaderboard. The 20 names were displayed brightly. Chuck Gomez, an ex-officer for Stanford Police Department, handled the neutron net. Your helmets are name-tagged. They will give you visual updates and location tracking for your allocated receivers. Your handheld notification device will tell you when your receiver is active. Xavier pointed towards a shelving unit to the rear of the room, which displayed 4 shelves, each containing 5 helmets and devices on each. The group each selected theirs. You will have a team of 5 CFL agents assisting you with your hunt. Once again, communication will be via your helmet to CFL Base Command. If you encounter any problems during your receiver hunt, one call to your team and they will assist you. After every successful execution, your team will also be on standby for your extraction via Thunderblade choppers. Are there any questions? Barked Xavier. None for me, said Kimmler, clipping a pulse sword to his belt. Chuck Gomez laughed at Henry Kimmler's nonchalant attitude as he repositioned the cigar in his mouth. The rest of the group had nothing to say, just eager to equip themselves. Okay then, may I wish you all a great hunt from all here at CFL. We appreciate your time and money you have invested in us. Please feel free to hone your skills on the assault course, said Xavier appreciatively. The sound of the high-tech equipment was ear-piercing as the group toyed with the weapons. Say, you up for a little side game? Kimmler propositioned Gomez. What you have in mind? Replied Gomez, carefully examining his helmet. Kimmler adjusted his utility belt around his oversized waist. Fastest kill time for your first 3, said Kimmler. Sure, smirked Gomez as he attached a neutron grenade to his belt. Chapter 11. Sarah fumbled in her handbag for her keys as she got out of her car. Making her way to the front door of the flat, she noticed the door already ajar. Blake? Are you home? She shouted, but no reply. She closed the door behind her, noticing that the lock was broken. Don't move. Kelly pushed a stun pistol into the back of her neck. Please, don't hurt me. Take what you want, cried Sarah. Hands up. Over there. Kelly directed Sarah to the chair in the living room, pushing the gun barrel into her neck. Kelly held the laptop in her other hand. Where is he? Seethed Kelly. Where's who? Replied Sarah. Kelly cracked the butt of the pistol against the side of Sarah's temple, knocking her unconscious. Blood trickled down the side of her face. Kelly opened the laptop and accessed the CFL database, accessing the financial banking platform and deactivating her father's cards linked to the account. She then opened the link to Lexi's control panel and attempted to shut down the vehicle that 27 was driving. It was no use. Tom had already manipulated Lexi's onboard systems with manual override. Damn it, rasped Kelly as she slammed the laptop shut. Sarah began to come round from the pistol blow. Now I'm going to ask you again, and this time you're going to tell me where he is, whispered Kelly close to Sarah's ear. If you're talking about Blake, he should be here. He finished his shift about an hour ago. He's usually home by now, sniffed Sarah as she wiped the blood from her head with the back of her hand. I'm looking for receiver 27. That laptop was carrying a beacon, and it led me here. Who else do you live with here? Questioned Kelly as she trained the pistol at Sarah's head. I live with my friend Blake. We share this flat together. I have no idea who receiver 27 is, replied Sarah sheepishly. Kelly huffed and walked over to the window. She stared at the traffic outside. She looked around the flat. Sarah cowered in the chair. Poking around Blake's belongings, she noticed a photo of him and Tom aboard a yacht, holding a shark between them. Him! Where is he? Kelly pointed at Tom in the photo. Oh, you're talking about Tom. That's his friend. I should have known he would have something to do with this. If it's money he owes you, I can assure you that Blake has nothing to do with his gambling debts, said Sarah sincerely. It has nothing to do with his debts. That motherfucker killed my parents. Now how do I find him? Kelly moved over to Sarah once more, holding the pistol close to her head. Look, I don't know where he is, and I know nothing about your parents. Here, take my phone. Call Blake. He'll know where he is, replied Sarah as she reached into her bag for her cell phone. Kelly snatched the phone from her and searched her contacts list. Jesus, slow down, Tom. You're going to get us killed. Where the hell are we going? Shouted Blake. Tom weaved the Lamborghini in and out of traffic at high speed. We got to get to the community settlement. That's where 58 out of 200 receivers are, including me. The rest are dead. I managed to get them safely here. It's a safe place. They're off the CFL tracking grid there. There's still 5 more on the run, replied Tom. Community settlement? What are you talking about? Listen, Tom, you're going to have to tell me what's going on here, demanded Blake. The laptop I was using back at your flat was Dr. Henson's. It had all the CFL database info. I took it after I killed him. Tom slowed down as he approached the outskirts of Stanford Mega City. You did what? Replied Blake, confused. It was me or him, Blake. I couldn't leave CFL. Once you're assigned as a receiver, you write your own death sentence. It's all corrupt. There's no cash and opt out. So you were a receiver? Asked Blake. Yes, but after my 10th prompt, I realized that I was the only one who had made it that far. They had not expected for receivers to last that long, so they broke their protocol and carried on with the hunt, replied Tom as he pulled up to the foot of the forest. If you knew it was corrupt, then why the hell did you pull me into it? Raged Blake. I manipulated your account. You were never going to become a receiver, just a giver, activator. You would have been able to cash out because I was controlling the software, replied Tom. Blake's phone had linked with Lexi's Bluetooth. Incoming call. The dashboard of Lexi lit up a neon green with the name Blake and Sarah calling. Accept, said Blake, activating the loudspeaker on Lexi. Blake, is that you? Asked Sarah. Yes, is everything okay? Replied Blake. No, it's not okay. Are you with Tom? She breathed heavily. Yes, he's right here with me now. Turn that car around from wherever you are and head back here or this bitch is dead, ranted Kelly. Tom shivered as he recognized the voice. Don't harm her. I'm on my way back, pleaded Tom. You got 1 hour, replied Kelly as the call ended. Oh, what the fuck? Who the hell is that? She's got Sarah, panicked Blake. Okay, I got this. Calm down, Blake. That's Henson's daughter. She's not going to kill anyone, not while I'm still alive. I need you to head into the forest about 500 meters north. That's where the rest are. Tell them Tom sent you and that I have organized the takeover of CFL. I will be back in a few hours with suits and weapons. I'll make sure Sarah is okay. Tom knew that no more execute prompts from CFL users could take place after he had encrypted the software earlier, although still unable to shut down the trackers on the final 5. Blake got out of the car a little puzzled. Tom pulled up the back seat, revealing a CFL suit and a cache of weaponry. Trust me, Blake. I'm going to make this right, said Tom as he climbed into the suit. He placed his helmet on the passenger seat. Blake stood motionless and confused for a moment before setting off into the woods. Tom turned round the Lamborghini and headed off at speed. Inside CFL weapons training, Xavier Gonzalez fumed at the news of the CFL software hack. He gave all 20 givers the go-ahead to search for the final 5 receivers. 2 Thunderblade choppers were waiting on the helipads outside the facility. Chapter 12. Tom arrived at Blake's flat, pushing the already ajar door open. Kelly had her pistol trained at 27 as he turned the corner into the living area. He put his hands above his head. Sarah was tied up and gagged at the side of Kelly. Get over here. Take off that belt and slowly throw that stun pistol to me, ordered Kelly, motioning to 27 to sit in the chair facing her. He looked over to Sarah as he sat down. Her eyes were reddened and tear-filled. 27 nodded and smiled at Sarah in a reassuring way as he slowly removed the belt and slid the pistol to Kelly. So how are we going to do this? Questioned Tom. There was a brief pause. You'll see, said Kelly, waving the pistol left and right towards 27. Kelly had already made the call to Gonzalez. Gomez and Kimmler were informed of the hunt and were told to make a real show of this one. The score between Gomez and Kimmler was 2-2. Tom was unaware that the 5 that were on the run, including himself, was now down to just 1. The competition between Kimmler and Gomez had gained a lot of online interest and was now trending. They had both eliminated 2 receivers and were now hungry for the elusive receiver 27. Tom sat in silence. Sarah let out a muffled cry once more as Kelly stared at 27 with hatred. Blake made his way through the woods, now arriving at the community settlement. He was stopped by one of the members. The settlement looked primal, a makeshift campsite, a far cry from the megacity living standards. These outsiders were reduced to a low standard of living for defiance against CFL. Who are you, and what's your business here? Shouted Jake, head of the resistance camp. I've been sent by Tom, receiver 27. He told me to come tell you we are ready to go to war with CFL. The 2 camp members standing to each side of Jake lowered their stun pistols as he gestured them to. Come, said Jake, waving him towards the wooden gates to the settlement. Blake walked over and joined him as they entered the gates into the settlement square. All 58 just as Tom had told him, 58 trained soldiers armed to the teeth. 27 saved our lives. Without his bravery and resistance to CFL, we would not be here. He is a god in the eyes of all of us here. We are ready to fight this war, said Jake. Blake listened with intent as the camp resistance leader led him towards his quarters within the settlement. 27 looked through the window as he heard 2 Thunderblades hovering above. He took a deep breath, calming himself as he turned to Kelly, who was now smiling. Sarah murmured with fear, still shivering with panic. So here we go. "It's now time for you to be taken from the game, Tom, you murdering son of a bitch," said Kuri menacingly. "Oh, shit." 27 squirmed around in the chair, trying to think of a way to get out of this. Kelly still trained the stun towards Tom's head. 27 reached his left hand down the side of the chair and gripped the console controller that Blake always stuffed down the side. Tom tossed it like a boomerang, knocking the pistol from Kuri's hand. He jumped onto her, pinning down her face to the wooden floor. The first chopper was down, and Gomez alighted, selecting his weapon of choice from his utility belt, the pulse sword. Chapter 13. Jake led the soldiers from the settlement and marched along the forest path on a mission toward Stanford Mega City, their destination CFL headquarters. They planned to destroy the whole facility, taking down the mainframe unit inside. Blake walked alongside him. It was a 30-minute walk, and conversation was minimal along the way. The crackle of white noise could be heard from the radio unit Jake had dangling from his hip that relayed messages from 27. Kimmler's chopper landed straight after Gomez alighted from his. He jumped out, making a dash after Gomez, who was now heading towards Blake's flat. Inside, 27 was untying Sarah. Kelly was now gagged and tied to another chair. Sarah made a dash towards the bathroom as she heard a pulse sword strike hit the front door. Gomez had struck his sword along the hinges on the frame. The plasma cut lanced through it like butter. The door collapsed inwards. 27 grabbed his pistol and belt from the floor, buckled up, and quickly positioned himself behind the kitchen breakfast bar. The kitchen window smashed inwards as Kimmler deployed a neutron grenade. It bounced off the side, dropping in front of him. Without thinking, he quickly grabbed it and tossed it towards the door Gomez was entering. It landed at his feet. He looked at 27, then looked towards the grenade, making a grab for it. It was too late. A small nuclear pulse hit him full on, hurling him backwards with considerable force against the choppers he'd arrived in. It had fried his cranium. Blood poured from facial orifices. 27 made a run to the bathroom, grabbing Sarah, telling her they have got to leave. He made his way cautiously towards the door. He fired a succession of stun blasts toward Kimmler, who now ran for cover behind a dumpster. He then blasted the two choppers' fuel tanks, igniting them. It was followed by two almighty explosions, covering the road in flames. Kimmler covered his head with his arms as hot chopper debris spewed on and around him. He screamed, running from his hiding place away from 27. Holding Sarah's hand, they ran towards the Lamborghini. Jumping inside, they sped off. Kimmler dusted his suit and washed as he drove off. He made a call to CFL headquarters. No one picked up the call. Blazing sirens echoed in and around the facility as Blake, Jake, and the settlement soldiers breached the front gates of CFL. The 18 other givers assigned to search the city had heard the news on the facility breach. They had quickly made their way back to join the fight with the settlement resistance. Piles of bodies lay left and right as the soldiers blasted away without fear, hell-bent on taking down the mainframe and ending the CFL corporation. Arriving soon after, 27 and Sarah drove straight through the destroyed gates of CFL along the compound's road towards headquarters. The soldiers were already inside, engaged in battle with CFL employees. Xavier Gonzalez, with nowhere to go, ran towards the elevator to the communications tower with access to his personal chopper to escape the carnage. 27 entered the facility to meet with Jake and his men. Sarah noticed Blake and quickly ran over to him, throwing her arms around him. "Communications are down. The soldiers have control of the training facility. Just the mainframe left," shouted Jake to 27 as the sound of stun weapons echoed around the facility. "Okay, you head on up there and shut down that fucking system for good," he replied as he strapped on one of the newest of weapons, the cyber cannon, to his arm, fusing around his forearm, stretching out an extra 2 feet. Jake blasted the security doors to the mainframe. Gonzalez had deactivated the lift from the top of the communications tower. Bursting through the emergency stairs door, he headed up 6 flights towards Gonzalez. The soldiers had now eliminated the rest of the givers that had arrived. Jake had lost at least 13 of the 58 he had. He was now inside the mainframe unit. He stared in awe at the rows of big iron. Their high stability and reliability enabled these machines to run uninterrupted for decades. But Jake was about to end that. Around Stanford Mega City, the thousands of subscribers to the CFL program were having trouble accessing the website, encountering the 404 page missing. Jake had thrown 3 neutron grenades inside the mainframe unit before dashing out into the open facility. The rest of his soldiers were there to greet him. Their mission was complete. The facility was terminated. Gonzalez opened the door to his personal Thunderblade chopper, quickly positioning himself in the pilot seat and firing up the electro-radial engines. 27 burst through the fire door to the roof. Gonzalez was strapping himself in as the rotors whipped round the top of the chopper in a whispering fashion. His face filled with fear as he aimed the cyber cannon towards him. The weapon Gonzalez had designed was now deciding his fate. He knew it was impossible to escape a blast from the ray it dispensed, but nevertheless, he pulled on the collective and grasped the cyclic, lifting him vertically. 27 had fired a bolt of blue towards the chopper, encasing it in a bubble of static electricity. Sparks fired from the rotors as it quickly shut down the mechanics on board, sending it into a tailspin. He quickly shielded himself behind an air conditioning unit as the thunder blade clipped its rotors off the side of the roof. Inside the cockpit, Gonzalez tried to right the chopper frantically before its interior burst into flames. He could hear his screams as the chopper fell down the side of the building, finally hitting the ground with an almighty explosion. Tom, a.k.a. 27, now no longer a number, headed down to the rest that had congregated in the facility courtyard. Their job was done. He walked over to Jake, smiling. Jake was smiling back as he pulled him in for a manly hug. Sarah and Blake stood beside him. The soldiers regrouped, by order of Jake as he headed them out, back towards the settlement. Sarah and Blake followed. Tom's mobile rang. There were nearly 13 missed calls. It was Jane. She was already at the presentation, giving him the good news on her project, oblivious to what had gone on. He ended the call, letting her know he was on his way. He watched as Jake, Sarah, and Blake, along with the rest of the soldiers, made their way into the distance. Tom turned and looked towards the CFL compound, a well-structured organization reduced to ruins. He started up the Lamborghini and headed away from the chaos. Just outside of the facility, Kimmler and Kelly Henson watched through binoculars as the carnage unfolded. He opened the briefcase Gonzalez had entrusted him with and checked the contents. The CFL hardware was still intact. Kelly had a cerebral chip implanted containing all of CFL's software. They both twisted hard on their accelerators to their electrobikes they had picked up from Kimmler's weapons storage unit just outside of Stanford Megacity and blasted off into the distance. Story 13. A Date with Diablo. 15 years ago. Little Tommy Grenko, age 7, watched once more as his father drank heavily, slumped in the armchair. Tommy played with his toy truck on the carpet. It had been 3 weeks since his mother's death. His father was having trouble dealing with the car accident. Tommy loved his mother, but was emotionally detached. It was just the way he was. He looked up to his father. He was all that he had left. Tommy had all the attributes about him for a serial killer in the making. His many squirrel and bird sacrifices that he engaged in down by the lake, through the woods near his home, was a sure sign he was out of the normal childhood ways. It was late evening as his father watched TV, but more staring through it than actually watching it. There was a knock at the door, which alerted his father. He quickly picked up a sawn-off shotgun from beside him. Tommy got up and ran for the door. "Wait," said his father just before he reached it. He looked bemused as his father aimed the shotgun towards the door. He signaled for his son to open it. He did so, but there was no one outside as Tommy checked along the porch. His father stood up from his chair. At the same time, a figure in a black hoodie and mask fired a suppressed shot through the window behind the TV. Tommy's father slumped back into his chair and dropped his bottle of brew to the carpet floor, its contents sloshing into the fabric. Blood trickled from a single shot to the forehead. Tommy made his way back into the house. He noticed and picked up a black playing card from the foot of the door. There was movement as he watched the assailant make his way through the woods. He couldn't see his face, but that dressed in black figure and the shock of his father's death had scarred him and stayed in his memories. Tommy's father was killed for a bookie's debt with the mob. Little Tommy was taken into care. Present day. Everything became silent around him as the chamber slid backwards then forwards. One round entered the mark's forehead, exiting the rear with an explosive display of brain matter, covering the store cashier who had his hands raised. He placed the pistol back into his holster, zipped up his raincoat, and flicked one of his signature devil-portrayed ace of spades black cards on top of the cadaver. He then headed casually out of the 7-Eleven store. Rain bounced off Diablo's wax raincoat as he opened the door to the car. He made the turn onto Route 13, torched it under a carriageway, switched to a black Ducati, and made the call to the Duke. "It's done," said Diablo calmly. An FBI informant was eliminated. Just another job for Diablo, one of many the Duke had assigned him with. 2 days later, Pete Creenan adjusted his tie in front of the mirror and took another sip of his coffee before picking up his briefcase and heading out of Creenan and Mitchell Law Associates. He arrived at Bridgetown County Court in time for the trial of Jimmy the Razor Vincenzo. Overwhelming evidence was going to put the Razor behind bars for a long time for 2 counts of murder. Creenan was famous for winning cases against the East Side Mafia. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, you've heard the statements, and you've seen the evidence. Now it's your turn to decide the fate of this individual's horrific crimes." "That's all, Your Honor," said Creenan, gathering his paperwork and sitting back down at the prosecution table. Vincenzo stared at Creenan with hate-filled eyes. Creenan looked back at him quite smugly. "There will be a 2-day adjournment for the jury's deliberation. The accused will be held at Bridgetown Penitentiary until then." Judge Harvey slammed down his hammer as the court began to empty. Creenan left the courtroom, followed closely by Eddie Marino, Vincenzo's defense attorney. "Great speech," said Marino sarcastically. "I aim to please," said Creenan as he shuffled quickly onto Main Street, leaving the revolving doors of the court building. "I must say, that was a great find, the shell casing that turned up at forensics," said Marino as he followed Creenan to the parking lot. "Is there anything else you need from me?" said Creenan, stopping at the driver's side of his Lexus. "No, just congratulations," said Marino, extending his hand. Creenan shook it. "Good luck with the sentencing." Marino headed off towards his vehicle, parked 2 doors to the left side of Creenan's. Sitting in his car, Creenan flipped his briefcase and thumbed through Vincenzo's paperwork, unnoticing a hooded figure looming in the back seat. The silencer's nose was pushed up against Creenan's headrest. The bullet punched a hole through, entering the back of Creenan's skull, exiting just under his right eye and carrying on through the windshield, expelling a splash of blood along the way. His torso jerked forward. His chest pressed against the steering wheel, engaging the car's horn. The rear passenger door lay ajar. The hooded man had vanished. Vincenzo knew he was going down. There was no way out of it, but decided to use Diablo's services one last time to get rid of that fucking filthy lawyer, as he put it. Hot beating sun shone down onto the poolside of Don the Duke Dominguez mansion. His plump and tan torso glistened with the sun's rays. Taking another hit of his Cuban cigar, he watched as the blonde-haired beauty, his trophy wife, swam up and down the length of the pool. The Don's cell phone rang, distracting him from his lustful stare. He answered. "It's done," said Diablo. The Duke ended the call, smiled to himself, and alighted from his sun lounger. Slipping on his flip-flops and donning a gold silk bathrobe, he made his way to the kitchen that overlooked the pool in his mansion. He opened the fridge and took out a cold beer, guzzling half and expelling a gassy burp. The engine growled as a black Mustang pulled alongside the curb outside of Bridgetown Heights Hotel. A man in a smart black suit and tie passed the keys to the valet standing outside the hotel as he pushed his way through the revolving doors into the lobby of the hotel. He walked quickly towards the lift, adjusting the strap on his shoulder of the bag he was carrying. The lift arrived. He pushed the button to floor 12, penthouse section. Using his slide card, he gained access to his apartment. A wonderful view of the city could be seen from the windows of his apartment. He sat down on the sofa facing the city and placed the bag he was carrying onto the glass table, unzipping it in the process. He produced a Smith & Wesson M&P 22, unscrewing the Sparrow suppressor, then placing it back onto the table. He reached once more into the bag and pulled a bunch of $50 bills, along with a pack of black playing cards. Leonard St. James, a.k.a. Diablo, alighted from the sofa and made his way to the bathroom. Switching on the shower, he stripped bare and stepped under the stream of hot water, the exact routine he performed after every hit. He dried himself off and redressed, back into a fresh black suit. The phone in his room began to ring. It was the concierge telling him there was a hand-delivered letter for him. Diablo acknowledged and made his way back down to the reception. The lift's doors opened on the ground floor as he made his way to reception. The concierge behind the counter noticed him approaching and placed the envelope onto the counter and signaled to him. Diablo picked up the letter and thanked the concierge before making his way back to the hotel's revolving doors. He had called the valet office from his room, so his car was ready for him as he left the building. Diablo drove to Bridgetown Woods, 20 miles from the city. He produced a pair of surgical gloves from the glove compartment and put them on. He placed the letter from the hotel in the compartment, closed it, then alighted from the car. Opening the trunk, he grabbed the black bag of clothing he was wearing on the last 2 hits and a shovel, then headed into the woods. Digging a foot-square hole in the soft woodland floor, he tossed in the bag. Diablo then reached into his suit inside pocket, taking out a lighter and his notepad. He tore out a couple of pages, lit them, then he threw them onto the bag in the hole. He watched the flames die out before covering the remains with wet soil, then headed back to the car. Starting up the powerful engine of the Mustang, he stirred up a cloud of dust behind him as he made his way over to the Duke's mansion. The butler opened the large front door to the Duke's mansion. Marina was on his cell as he headed in. He had just heard the news of Creedon's murder. He made his way through to the back of the building to where the Duke was sitting poolside. "Jesus, I've just got news Creedon was killed," said Marino, now standing next to the Duke. "Vincenzo was a good man, a dedicated soldier of mine. That was his last request before his incarceration." "A black playing card. You used Diablo?" questioned Marino. "Who else?" said the Duke casually, sipping a Jack and Coke. "Well, I just came over to tell you the news about Vincenzo, but I guess you already know," replied Marino. The Duke slipped off his bathrobe and plopped into the pool. "I appreciate your services. You did all you could do, Marino. My friend there has your payment," said the Duke, pointing towards Arturo, his right-hand man in a black suit and Ray-Bans, standing in the shade to the side of the patio doors. Marino made his way to the table next to where he stood. The case was already open as Marino looked inside. "As agreed, $50,000, said the Duke, as he performed a slow backstroke down the length of the pool. "I appreciate it," replied Marino, closing the case. The butler arrived at the patio doors. "There's a Mr. James to see you, sir." "See him through," replied the Duke. Diablo was already stepping through the doors, poolside. "If there's anything else I can help you with in the future, Don Dominguez, please don't hesitate to call me," gestured Marino as he made his way past Diablo, unaware that he had just faced the man who killed Creedon and many more victims. Only the Don knew Diablo's true identity. "Oh, I will," replied the Duke nonchalantly, now alighting from the pool, slipping back on his robe before lying back on the lounger. Diablo sat down at the table next to the Duke's lounger and poured himself a Jack, straight, with ice from the bucket resting on the table. "Everything go okay with that rat bastard Jorge?" seethed the Duke. "A little more mess than usual. I had to take him in a 7-Eleven. It was the only window I had," replied Diablo officially. "That's okay. That will send a message to any other American that tries to fuck with my operation," said the Duke with sincerity. "The Creedon hit was a lot smoother," said Diablo. "Yes, I thank you for taking that job on short notice. I promised Vincenzo that I could get it done." "I have another job if you're interested," asked the Duke. He signaled Arturo over. He held another briefcase and a folder with the marks details inside. Arturo flipped open the case. Diablo took a glimpse of the contents and closed it before thumbing through the info inside the folder. "An old colleague of mine. Runs a successful construction company. Only he has not paid back the interest on the loan I gave him to set the fucking business up," said the Duke. Diablo looked through the paperwork meticulously. "He's gone past the point now of a debt, and he has started to mess around with my mind. I can't help but imagine that motherfucker is laughing behind my back. So it's the only way to put my mind at rest, to get rid of that cocksucker and once again enforce my stature. Let them fuckers know not to fuck with me," said the Duke comically, now letting up a Cuban. "When does it need to be done?" asked Diablo, closing the paperwork. "Tomorrow afternoon. He has an unveiling of his new project down in the east side of Wick City. He's setting up a little jamboree full of press reporters, marketing for his public sector housing plan," said the Duke. "I'll get on it," replied Diablo as he picked up the file and case making his way out back to his car. The Duke's butler replaced the ice bucket with a fresh one as the Duke lay back in his lounger, soaking up the rays. Diablo closed the door to the car and flicked through the Mark's info once more. John Hyman, his home address, pictures of his wife and 2 young children. He had more info about him than his own wife. He closed the folder and opened the glove compartment, reached in and produced the letter from the concierge. On the front read, St. James. He flipped it over. Using his finger, he ripped open the envelope and pulled out the letter. I know who you are, and I know what you do, and I'm coming for you. It took Diablo by surprise. The words were made up from newspaper cuttings. Slightly unnerved, Diablo turned around quickly in both directions, evaluating his surroundings with impending paranoia. He put the letter back in the envelope, then back in the glove compartment, before starting up the car and heading back to his apartment. Diablo arrived at his apartment. The concierge could give him no info on who had delivered the letter. He threw the folder and the letter onto his bed and opened the chest storage box at the end of it. He removed a few blankets and grabbed the case to the Sako TRG-22, along with a 6.5 Ultra 7 suppressor. He packed them neatly into a black duffel bag. He had made the decision to take out Hyman from a distance. He made a call to Arturo to relay the message to the Duke of his plans for the hit. Diablo sat down on the sofa that overlooked a brightly lit city, took a sip of beer, and stared at the envelope before drifting into a restless sleep. The West and East Point buildings overlooked Wick City with a perfect vantage point to the stage Hyman was to commence his speech. There were many people, government officials, reporters, and many of the locals that were promised new housing. Children rode on the free rides of a mini fairground Hyman had set up. A band played music as an engineer tested the microphone on stage. The sound of hustle and bustle of people shuffling around trying to find the best spot to listen to the speech could be heard amongst the band and children's laughter. At the top corner of the West building, he took out the sniper rifle and suppressor components and carefully attached them together. Then, lying down with the butt of the rifle jammed into his shoulder, he adjusted the rifle's sight. The stage was covered in his crosshairs. He then swung the rifle 45 degrees and watched Diablo constructing his weapon on the East building. It had taken him years to track him down, but now he finally had him. Tommy Granco had worked for John Hyman for the last few years and had been given info on Diablo through Arturo, double-crossing his boss, the Duke. But Arturo had a higher agenda in mind. He'd made plans to only serve the Don temporarily. He never stayed around mobs for too long. He was classed as a kind of sellsword and temporary bodyguard for the families. Tommy worked as a cleaner himself and had all the skills Diablo possessed. The procession of black limos, a total of 3, convoyed down the street toward center stage. Reporters activated their cameras. The crowd cheered as the convoy approached. Diablo had positioned himself on the roof corner of East, his body sprawled out behind him, with his head just above the roof, with the TRG resting on a tripod. On the West building, Tommy was in a similar position, only his rifle was lined up on Diablo's head. Hyman reached the stage and gave his speech. On West building, Tommy Granco packed up his rifle and made his way to the top of East. He walked over to Diablo. Blood seeped out from under him. His head was lodged sideways on the rooftop wall. Granco stood in silence for a while, before throwing a black playing card onto his bloodied corpse.